I am Genevieve Caldwell. I am 27 years old, and 48 hours ago, my mother spent $3 million on a Tuesday morning to ensure my name was legally scrubbed from the Caldwell Family Trust. She thought she was erasing me. She did not know she was just clearing the board for my husband. To understand how a mother could execute a financial erasure against her own daughter before her morning coffee, you have to understand Texas. Not the state itself, but the rigid, suffocating ecosystem of Houston elite society. In our world, old oil money and inherited real estate portfolios dictate a person's worth. Lavish charity galas, country club memberships, and strategic marriages are the only currencies that matter. 2 nights ago at the River Oaks Country Club, I committed the ultimate sin. The grand foyer buzzed with the practiced murmur of billionaires. Men in bespoke tuxedos discussed offshore drilling permits, while women, weighed down by generational diamonds, appraised each other with surgical precision. I stood near a towering ice sculpture of a rearing stallion, resting my hand lightly on my husband's arm. Leo Vanguard wore a simple charcoal suit. The cut was clean, unbranded, and entirely out of place in a room desperate to showcase its price tags. Leo is a classic car mechanic. His hands, though scrubbed pristine for the evening, bore the faint shadow of engine grease near the cuticles. In a culture where status is a religion, Leo was a quiet affront to the entire room. My mother, Victoria, materialized from the crowd like a shark, sensing a drop of blood in the water. She wore an emerald silk gown, her posture rigid, her gaze locked onto Leo with unvarnished disdain. "You brought him," she stated. Her voice hovered barely above a whisper, yet it cut sharply through the ambient chatter. "He is my husband, Mother," I replied, keeping my tone even. Victoria's eyes flicked over Leo's suit, her lip curling a fraction of an inch. "He is a grease monkey, Genevieve. You parade him around my peers, expecting us to pretend this is an acceptable union. You are a Caldwell. You are expected to elevate this family, not drag it into the dirt." Leo did not bristle. He did not tighten his jaw or shift his stance. He simply looked at Victoria with a calm, analytical patience, the way a man might study a malfunctioning engine. He reached out his thumb, gently brushing across my knuckles in a silent, grounding gesture. "I will not tolerate this charade any longer," Victoria continued, stepping closer to me. "You have a choice. Annul this farce by tomorrow morning. I have the legal paperwork drafted. Or you walk out of those double doors and you cease to be my daughter. Every cent, every art gallery connection, every property gone. You will be nothing." The silence stretched between us. I looked at the woman who had raised me. I saw no maternal warmth, only a fierce, terrifying obsession with optics. "I will need my purse," I said. Victoria's eyes widened, a rare crack in her porcelain facade. "You are choosing poverty. I am choosing my husband." As I turned toward the exit, Victoria's hand snapped out, catching the leather strap of my bag. "Leave it. Paid for by my trust." Victoria reached into the clutch and pulled out a heavy, antique silver hand mirror. It was a Caldwell heirloom, passed down for 4 generations. "You do not get to take our history with you. You are no longer worthy of our reflection." I released the strap. I took Leo's arm and walked out of the River Oaks Club without looking back, leaving my mother standing alone in the foyer, clutching the silver glass. What happened next? That is what I am here to tell you. Before I continue, welcome to Aura Vengeance. Please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely want to know how this story ends. And let me know in the comments how old you are and where you are watching from today. Now let me bring you back to the morning after the gala. The harsh reality of exile arrived faster than I could process. I stood in a rain-streaked Austin coffee shop, staring at the small digital display on the espresso counter. The word "declined" flashed in harsh red letters. I fished through my wallet, producing a secondary card tied directly to my business accounts. Declined again. Account frozen. Victoria had not just cut me off. She had orchestrated a total financial freeze-out. I was an independent art restorer specializing in 18th century European oil paintings. My entire career relied on wealthy patrons and high society gallery connections. By noon, my phone began ringing with cancellations. A prominent Houston gallery owner called to terminate my most lucrative restoration contract, citing unforeseen directional changes. I knew exactly what that meant. Victoria's influence reached across state lines. She was calling her country club peers, ensuring I starved out of the industry entirely. I packed my specialized chemical solvents, my magnifying visors, and my delicate brushes into cardboard boxes. I vacated my pristine state-of-the-art studio and moved everything into Leo's modest home on the outskirts of Austin. The transition from Texas royalty to working-class survival felt like a physical weight pressing against my chest. That evening, I stood in the doorway of Leo's garage. The space smelled of motor oil and old dust. Leo was leaning over the exposed engine of a rusted 1968 Shelby Mustang. His hands were coated in heavy grease as he meticulously adjusted a valve. His quiet, methodical dedication sharply contrasted the loud, toxic panic of my mother's social climbing. He did not ask for attention. He simply did the work. I felt a sudden, suffocating wave of self-doubt. Without my studio, without the Caldwell name backing my credibility, I did not know if I could secure another museum-quality commission. I was 27 years old, and my mother had successfully erased my professional identity in less than a day. I walked over to the workbench, picking up a stray rag. Leo looked up, his expression softening the moment he saw my face. They canceled the Houston contract, I told him, my voice shaking, despite my best efforts to sound brave. All of them. She is calling everyone Leo. Leo wiped his hands on a shop towel. He walked over and pulled me into his arms, not caring about the oil staining my shirt. "We will figure it out, Genevieve. You have a gift. No one can freeze that out of you." I wanted to believe him. But the next morning, an unmarked black envelope arrived in our rusted mailbox, carrying a dossier that would force me onto a collision course with a world I thought I had left behind. The black envelope held a single sheet of heavy cardstock. It was not a lifeline. It was a formal notice of immediate lease termination for my downtown art restoration studio. The property management company cited a vague breach of contract clause regarding frozen escrow accounts. I recognized the signature at the bottom. The building was owned by a holding firm run by my mother's preferred golf partner at River Oaks. My financial exile was no longer just numbers on a screen. It was physical. I had 48 hours to vacate a space I had spent 3 years building. Leo rented a moving truck. We spent the weekend carrying crates of delicate horsehair brushes, imported varnishes, and custom ultraviolet lighting arrays down 3 flights of stairs. My entire professional identity was reduced to cardboard boxes stacked in the corner of a residential garage. This was the new reality. My mother inhabited a universe defined by fragility. Growing up, my environment was constructed of things that shattered easily. Thin crystal flutes that rang a high-pitched warning if you set them down too hard. Melting ice sculptures that wept onto silk tablecloths. Relationships built on the precarious edge of social approval, ready to fracture at a single misstep. Victoria Caldwell demanded perfection because her empire was made of glass. Leo Vanguard lived in a world of indestructible elements. I sat on an overturned milk crate watching him work. He was bent over the exposed engine bay of the 1968 Shelby Mustang. The garage smelled of raw gasoline, heated metal, and the sharp tang of my chemical solvents. Leo held a steel wrench, his forearms flexing as he torched a rusted bolt. He did not rush. He did not curse when the wrench slipped. He simply adjusted his grip and applied a steady, relentless pressure until the metal yielded. There was a profound quiet in his dedication. He was breathing life back into a discarded machine, using nothing but his own strength and knowledge. He did not need an audience to validate his effort. His confidence was anchored deep in the concrete floor beneath him. Watching the grease stain his knuckles, I felt a strange sense of safety. My mother relied on the fear of others to project power. Leo relied solely on his own capable hands. But capable hands could only stretch $20 so far. The first week of my working-class survival stripped away any lingering illusions. Without the Caldwell Trust Fund paying my vendor accounts, I could not afford premium bonding agents or specialty pigments. I had to rely on cheaper alternatives, carefully measuring every drop of solvent as if it were liquid gold. I set up a makeshift easel near the garage door, using natural sunlight instead of my expensive halogen rigs. I started making calls. I was naive enough to believe my portfolio would speak louder than my maiden name. I had spent years meticulously repairing 18th century European landscapes and reviving tarnished portraits for the most prestigious collections in the state. My skill was undeniable. Or so I thought. I dialed the direct line of a prominent Dallas curator who had practically begged me to restore a damaged French Romantic piece just a month prior. The phone rang 5 times before his assistant answered, offering a clipped, practiced apology. The curator was suddenly unavailable for the foreseeable future. I brushed it off as a scheduling conflict. I called a private collector in Houston who owned 3 pieces I had personally preserved. He answered, but his tone was unnaturally cold. He claimed he had decided to halt all restoration projects indefinitely and hung up before I could ask a single question. By the 5th day, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Every door I knocked on slammed shut. Every warm contact turned freezing cold. The Texas art scene, which had once celebrated my exhibitions, now treated my name like a contagion. The truth finally revealed itself on a Tuesday afternoon. I called an older gallery owner named Richard Thorne. He was a veteran of the Austin Art District, someone who operated slightly outside the orbit of the Houston oil tycoons. He had mentored me during my early 20s, praising my delicate brushwork. Richard answered on the second ring. His voice sounded heavy, weary. "Genevieve," he said, sighing into the receiver, "I told my receptionist to block your number. I should not even be talking to you right now." "Richard, I need work," I pleaded, gripping the plastic edge of my temporary workbench. "I know you have that damaged Dutch landscape in your vault. I will do it for half my usual rate. I just need a commission to keep my business afloat." A long, painful pause stretched across the line. The silence felt heavier than a rejection. "It is not about your rate, Genevieve." Richard lowered his voice as if someone might be listening outside his office door. "Your mother called me yesterday. She did not just ask me to pass on your services. She threatened to pull her entire private collection from my upcoming autumn exhibition. She implied that any gallery owner who hands you a canvas will find themselves entirely blacklisted by the River Oaks Cultural Committee." My stomach plummeted. Victoria was not simply erasing my inheritance. She was actively hunting my livelihood. "She is trying to starve you out," Richard continued, his tone laced with genuine regret. "She wants you desperate. She wants you crawling back to Houston begging for forgiveness." "I am sorry, kid. I cannot risk my gallery to fight Victoria Caldwell. No one in this state will." The line went dead. I lowered the phone, staring blankly at the rusted bumper of Leo's Mustang. The gravity of my mother's cruelty finally settled into my bones. She knew I drew my self-worth from my art. By systematically cutting off every avenue of employment, she intended to break my spirit and force me to abandon my husband out of pure economic necessity. The Texas Elite Network was a closed circle, and Victoria held the only key. I could not fight her using the same social connections she controlled. If I tried to battle her in Houston or Dallas, she would crush me before I even picked up a brush. Leo stepped away from the car, wiping his forehead with the back of his forearm. He saw my face and immediately set his tools down. The heavy thud of the steel wrench hitting the workbench echoed in the quiet garage. He did not ask what was wrong. He walked over, pulled up a wooden stool, and sat beside me, waiting until I was ready to speak. "She is calling the galleries," I whispered, staring at my empty hands. "She is blacklisting me. Every contact I spent years building is gone. Richard just told me she is threatening to ruin anyone who hires me." Leo absorbed the information without a flinch. His dark eyes remained steady, an unshakable anchor in the middle of my storm. He reached out, taking my clean hands in his oil-stained fingers. "Then we stop playing her game," he said softly. "If your mother owns the Texas art scene, you find someone who does not care about Texas." His logic was flawless, but it felt impossible. High-end art restoration was a niche market, reliant almost entirely on local networking and whispered recommendations at charity galas. Finding a wealthy private client outside of Victoria's sphere of influence while operating out of a residential garage felt like trying to catch a ghost. I spent the next 3 weeks operating in a state of quiet desperation. I took odd jobs restoring minor damaged frames for local antique shops, making barely enough to cover our utility bills. I sold my designer clothes online just to buy groceries. The nights were the hardest. I would lie awake listening to the crickets outside, wondering if my mother had won, wondering if my defiance had doomed both Leo and myself to a life of perpetual struggle. But my husband never wavered. Every morning he made coffee, kissed my forehead, and went to work on his cars, moving with a silent, enduring strength. He never once complained about the sudden influx of my boxes or the smell of varnish permeating his home. His steadfast presence became my only sanctuary. Yet the pressure continued to build. The bank sent a notice regarding a missed payment on the small loan I used to buy my specialized microscopic equipment. If I did not secure a major commission within 14 days, they would repossess the tools I needed to do my job. My career was teetering on the edge of total collapse. I needed a miracle. I needed a patron who possessed enough wealth to afford my skills and enough anonymity to remain entirely invisible to the Caldwell empire. The answer arrived on a rainy Thursday morning, walking right past the rusted mailbox and stepping directly onto our cracked concrete driveway. It was a man wearing a sharp-tailored suit, carrying a locked metal briefcase. He did not look like he belonged in our working-class neighborhood. He looked like corporate armor. And he was heading straight for my garage. The man in the tailored suit did not hesitate as he navigated the oil stains on our driveway. He carried himself with the rigid posture of a corporate fixer, someone paid handsomely to solve expensive problems quietly. He stopped at the edge of the open garage, shielding his eyes from the harsh morning sun. "Are you Genevieve Caldwell?" he asked, his voice flat and professional. I stepped forward, wiping my hands on a shop towel. "I go by Genevieve Vanguard now. How can I help you?" He placed a locked metal briefcase onto my makeshift wooden workbench. He did not introduce himself. He simply stated he represented a private wealth management firm acting on behalf of an anonymous client. The client required the immediate and highly classified restoration of a severely damaged 18th century European maritime painting. He snapped the metal latches open. Inside rested a rolled canvas wrapped in archival muslin. I carefully pulled back the fabric. The smell of decaying varnish and damp canvas filled the air. It was a masterpiece of Dutch origin, depicting a storm tearing through a fleet of merchant ships. The brushwork was phenomenal, but the piece had suffered profound neglect. A jagged tear marred the lower left quadrant, and water damage had warped the structural integrity of the painted hull. "My client needs this ready for a private auction in exactly 3 weeks, the man stated. "The piece must be flawless." Because of the expedited timeline and the strict requirement for discretion, my firm is prepared to offer a premium rate. He handed me a crisp white envelope. I opened the flap and pulled out a cashier check. The number written across the heavy paper made my breath catch in my throat. It was a staggering amount. It was enough capital to pay off my equipment loans, secure a private studio space, and keep my household funded for the next 2 years. It was financial salvation handed to me in a dusty garage. "But there are conditions," the man continued. "You will sign a strict non-disclosure agreement. You will not ask questions about the provenance of the painting. You will not document the restoration process on any public platform. If you agree, the funds are yours today." I looked at Leo, who was standing quietly near the rusted Shelby Mustang. He gave me a single, subtle nod. He trusted my judgment. "I will take the job," I told the man. He slid a thick stack of legal documents across the table. I signed my name on the dotted lines, securing the contract. The man closed his empty briefcase, tipped his head in a brief acknowledgement, and walked back down the driveway. I was finally employed again. But the relief was incredibly short-lived. Less than an hour after the corporate fixer drove away, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was not a standard text message. It was a notification from a highly encrypted burner application I had downloaded months ago at the explicit instruction of my sister-in-law. Maya is married to my brother Preston. She is a powerhouse corporate litigator with a mind that operates like a steel trap. She is also a brilliant African-American woman navigating the suffocating, venomous waters of Texas high society. My mother, Victoria, despises her. Victoria weaponizes polite Southern racism with devastating precision. She throws lavish country club garden parties and ensures Maya is seated next to the kitchen swinging doors. She offers backhanded compliments about Maya's natural hair while smiling for society photographers. And my brother Preston simply stands there, swirling the ice in his scotch glass. He is too weak and entirely too terrified of losing his position in the Caldwell Family Trust to ever defend his own wife. Maya endures the toxic environment because she is not a victim. She is a strategist. She refuses to sink with a sinking ship. She has been quietly gathering operational intelligence, calculating her exit on her own terms. I opened the encrypted application. The message from Maya was brief but explosive. The Caldwell empire is cracking, Maya wrote. Victoria's social climbing finally hit a wall. She made consecutive, terrible investments in volatile tech startups and purchased several dried-up oil leases just to maintain appearances against her rivals. Those moves triggered severe margin calls. They are quietly drowning in crushing corporate debt. Preston is panicking. He knows if the banks foreclose, the social humiliation will destroy Victoria. He is secretly trying to liquidate the Caldwell private art collection to cover the immediate shortfall. He is using blind shell companies to hire independent contractors so the Houston elite do not find out they are broke. Watch your back. I read the message 3 times. The words felt like a physical blow. Victoria had disowned me for marrying a mechanic, claiming I was dragging our prestigious legacy into the dirt. Yet her precious legacy was nothing but a fragile facade built on predatory loans and desperate vanity. I looked down at the damaged maritime painting resting on my workbench. A cold, sharp realization pierced through my mind. I leaned closer to the canvas, studying the specific brushstrokes rendering the violent storm. I knew this painting. I had stared at it hundreds of times during my childhood. It used to hang above the grand fireplace in my late grandfather's private study. The anonymous client was not a stranger. The anonymous client was my brother. Preston needed this damaged masterpiece restored to fetch top dollar at a rapid private auction to save our mother from bankruptcy. He had hired a third-party blind broker to hide his tracks from his wealthy peers. That broker, seeking the absolute best independent art restorer available outside the immediate Houston society circles, had unknowingly found me. My own brother was paying his exiled sister to save him from financial ruin. My hands began to shake. I gripped the edges of the wooden table. The sheer irony of the situation tasted like copper on my tongue. I held the fate of the Caldwell estate in my grease-stained workspace. I could destroy them right now. I could refuse the restoration contract. I could mail the torn canvas back to Preston in a cardboard tube and let the bank margin calls crush Victoria into dust. I could leak the information to the Houston Social Registry and watch her precious reputation burn to the ground. The anger swelled inside my chest, a hot, heavy wave demanding retaliation. They had thrown me away. They had actively tried to starve me out of my industry. But then I looked at the cashier check resting next to the canvas. If I rejected the job, I would lose the capital I desperately needed to survive Victoria's ongoing blacklist. My specialized microscopic tools would be repossessed by the end of the week. Leo and I would be pushed entirely to the brink. I could not let my mother's financial rot infect my new marriage. I picked up my phone and typed a secure reply to Maya. I have the maritime painting I wrote. Preston's broker just hired me. What is his exact timeline? The response came less than a minute later. He needs the auction funds cleared by the 28th, Maya replied. The bank will initiate public foreclosure on the River Oaks mansion on the 30th. Take their money, Genevieve. Secure your own foundation. Let them walk blind right to the edge of the cliff. Maya was right. Emotion was a liability. Survival required cold calculation. Maya was feeding me the exact coordinates of my family's vulnerabilities, and I was perfectly positioned to exploit them. I put the phone away and turned on my ultraviolet examination lamp. The pale purple light washed over the cracked varnish, illuminating decades of hidden damage. I picked up a delicate cotton swab and dipped it into a custom chemical solvent. I was going to fix my grandfather's painting. I was going to deliver a flawless, museum-quality restoration. I would take Preston's money and use it to build an impenetrable fortress around my own life. I began to carefully strip away the dirt from the canvas. Every stroke of my brush felt like a quiet declaration of war. Victoria thought she had cut me out of the narrative. She had no idea I was the only person holding the thread that kept her entire universe from unraveling. I worked long into the night, the hum of the garage fan blending with the steady rhythm of Leo's wrench across the room. We were two outcasts, operating in the shadows, quietly preparing for a storm. The restoration process consumed my every waking hour. I mapped the chemical composition of the original 18th century pigments, creating flawless synthetic matches to bridge the torn canvas fibers. I did not leave the garage for days, subsisting on black coffee and the sheer adrenaline of the impending collision. But as I neared the final stages of the intricate repair, a new problem emerged. I needed a highly restricted industrial bonding agent to seal the repaired hull of the painted ship. It was a chemical solvent, not available to the general public. Only elite commercial facilities carried it. I walked over to Leo, who was wiping down the polished fender of the Shelby. "I need a favor," I said, showing him the specific chemical compound written on a piece of paper. "Do you know any commercial garages in Austin that might stock this industrial solvent? I cannot finish the restoration without it." Leo looked at the paper. His dark eyes scanned the chemical name. He did not hesitate. "I have it," he said simply. "You have a restricted commercial bonding agent in this residential garage?" I asked, my brow furrowing in confusion. "No," he replied, folding the shop towel. "I have it at my other workshop. I will take you there tonight. You can grab whatever you need." I stared at my husband, a sudden prickle of unease forming at the base of my neck. He had never mentioned another workshop. I thought this dusty garage was the extent of his mechanical world. I had no idea that a simple request for a chemical solvent was about to shatter every single assumption I had ever made about the man I married. The card reader emitted a flat, dual-tone beep. I took the key card and climbed into my modest sedan. The drive took 30 minutes, winding away from the suburban glow of Austin into darker, isolated terrain. I expected a chain-link fence and a row of corrugated metal storage lockers. I expected dust and gravel. What I found made me stop the car at the edge of the property line. It was a fortress. High concrete walls bordered a sprawling property monitored by a network of infrared security cameras. A heavy wrought iron gate blocked the entrance, flanked by a reinforced guardhouse. A man wearing a tactical uniform stepped out of the booth. His hand rested near the holstered weapon on his hip. I rolled down my window, my heart hammering against my ribs. I held up the black keycard Leo had given me. The guard did not ask for my name. He saw the card, glanced at a tablet in his hand, and gave a sharp nod. The iron gates glided open in profound silence. I drove slowly up the sweeping paved driveway. The architecture of the main building was stunning. It was a staggering structure of dark glass and engineered steel blending seamlessly into the Texas hillside. This was not a secondary workshop. This was a high-security vault. I parked near the side entrance and swiped the card against a biometric scanner. The glass doors parted. The climate inside was perfectly controlled, the air thick with the scent of conditioned leather, polished metal, and high-grade synthetic oil. I walked down a polished concrete corridor and entered the main floor. The breath left my lungs. Arranged beneath pristine theatrical lighting sat a fleet of flawless vintage automobiles. I recognized the silhouettes from the exclusive concourse events my grandfather used to attend. A pristine 1962 Ferrari sat near a flawless Aston Martin DB5. There were classic Porsches and rare Jaguars, each restored to a level of perfection that rivaled international museums. Millions of dollars in automotive history rested silently in the cavernous room. My husband was a mechanic who changed his own oil in a drafted residential garage. He drank cheap beer and wore unbranded cotton shirts. Yet he held the keys to a facility that rivaled the finest private collections in the world. I moved through the rows of vehicles, my footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. I found the designated supply room near the back of the facility. The shelves were immaculate, categorized with surgical precision. I located the restricted chemical solvent exactly where Leo said it would be. As I reached for the canister, my eyes caught a glint of metal on the adjacent stainless steel workbench. It was a bespoke wrench forged from titanium. The tool was surprisingly light but incredibly strong, designed for high-performance engineering. I picked it up, tracing my thumb over the handle. There was an engraving etched deep into the metal. It was a corporate crest, a stylized falcon rendered in sharp geometric lines, hovering above two words: Vanguard Holdings. Vanguard. My new last name. A cold chill spidered down my spine. Vanguard Holdings was not a minor enterprise. Anyone raised in the Texas elite ecosystem knew the whispers of that specific corporate monolith. They were old, quiet money. They operated private equity firms, shell corporations, and luxury asset acquisitions. They did not attend country club galas. They owned the banks that financed the country clubs. I placed the titanium wrench back onto the steel bench. My mind raced, connecting fragments of my marriage I had previously ignored. The way Leo never panicked over bills, his casual dismissal of Victoria's threats, the sheer unbothered confidence he projected when navigating rooms filled with billionaires. He did not act like a man intimidated by wealth because he was not intimidated. I grabbed the solvent and drove back to our house in a state of numb disbelief. When I pulled into the driveway, the garage door was still open. Leo was wiping down his tools, moving with the same steady, rhythmic grace he always possessed. He looked up and smiled, seeing the chemical canister in my hand. "Did you find it?" he asked, his tone casual. I set the canister onto the wooden table. I did not smile back. "I found the solvent," I said, keeping my voice low and measured. I also found a titanium wrench engraved with the crest of Vanguard Holdings. I saw armed guards, Leo. I saw a fleet of cars worth more than the entire River Oaks real estate district. Leo paused. He folded the oil-stained shop towel and placed it onto the fender of the Mustang. He did not look panicked. He did not scramble for excuses. His composure remained infuriatingly calm. "That facility belongs to a private equity group," he explained, holding my gaze. "I manage special assets for them. They acquire rare vehicles, and I oversee the restoration and preservation protocols. I am just a caretaker, Genevieve. I prefer working here in the quiet of our own garage. The corporate side is suffocating." His explanation was smooth. It was highly logical. It accounted for the security, the wealth, and his access. He was, technically, telling the truth. But I had grown up surrounded by liars. My mother lied about her wealth. My brother lied about his loyalty. I knew the subtle cadence of a half-truth. A caretaker did not carry a black access card that commanded armed guards to step aside without a single question. A caretaker did not use bespoke titanium tools engraved with their own surname. "You are keeping secrets from me," I said, the sting of betrayal thickening my words. "My mother tore my life apart because she thought you were a nobody. You let me lose my studio. You let me pack my entire existence into cardboard boxes. Who are you, Leo?" "I am the man who loves you," he replied, stepping closer. "I never lied about that. The corporate world is toxic. I wanted a life with you, away from the noise and the status games. I am sorry I did not explain the scope of my employment earlier. but you are safe with me." He reached out to touch my arm, but I stepped back. The spousal secrecy overlapped with the suffocating pressure of my mother's sabotage, creating a heavy trap. I was fighting a two-front war. I was battling a family trying to destroy my future, and sleeping next to a husband hiding his past. The silence between us stretched thin and brittle. The trust that had anchored my working-class survival was now fractured. I looked at the man I had sacrificed my inheritance for and realized I was sharing a home with a stranger. Before I could press him further, the encrypted burner phone in my pocket vibrated with a sharp sequence of alerts. I pulled the device out and opened the secure application. It was Maya. The text block was long, indicating a severe escalation. I read the words, and the air left the room. "Preston just finalized the timeline for the anonymous art sale," Maya wrote, "but that is not the worst part. Victoria secured a phantom investor. She is organizing a lavish public gala next month at the River Oaks Club. She plans to announce a corporate bailout, rescuing the Caldwell estate from ruin. She is spinning her near bankruptcy into a triumphant business partnership. The phantom investor is a private entity calling themselves the Lone Star Heritage Trust." I stared at the screen, the pieces of the puzzle snapping into a terrifying alignment. My mother was not drowning anymore. She was preparing to rise from the ashes and reassert her dominance over the Houston elite. And she was using the funds from the very painting I was currently restoring to bridge the gap until this mysterious Lone Star Trust finalized the bailout. I looked from the glowing screen to the damaged 18th century canvas resting on my workbench. Then I looked at Leo, who was watching me with an unreadable expression. The Houston Society Network was preparing for a coronation. Victoria was about to parade her survival in front of the people who had blacklisted me. But Maya had just handed me the name of my mother's savior, Lone Star Heritage Trust. I did not know who was funding that trust. I did not know how Preston planned to launder the art auction money. But I knew I held the physical linchpin of their entire survival strategy in my grease-stained garage. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, leaving Leo standing in the silence. The mystery of my husband would have to wait. My mother was building a new glass castle, and I was going to find out exactly who was supplying the sand. The silence in the garage felt suffocating. I stood beneath the harsh fluorescent lights, staring at the man I had married. The encrypted message from Maya burned in my pocket, but the mystery standing right in front of me demanded immediate resolution. I could not fight a war against my mother while my own foundation was built on an illusion. I turned away from the wooden workbench and walked into the house. The kitchen was small, functional, and steeped in the quiet domestic life we had built over the last 2 years. I dropped my keys onto the laminate counter. The metal clattered against the surface, ringing sharply in the still air. Leo followed me inside. He stood in the doorway, his broad shoulders filling the frame. He did not look defensive. He looked like a man who knew a long-delayed reckoning had finally arrived. "I need the truth," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "No more deflections about managing special assets. No more half answers. I just walked through a high-security vault filled with millions of dollars in rare vehicles. I saw a titanium wrench engraved with our last name. Tell me who you really are, Leo." He let out a slow, measured breath. He walked over to the kitchen sink, turning on the faucet. He pumped a harsh citrus soap onto his palms and began scrubbing the heavy engine grease from his skin. I watched the dark water spiral down the drain. He was washing away the mechanic, stripping the disguise right in front of my eyes. He grabbed a towel, dried his hands, and turned to face me. "My grandfather founded Vanguard Holdings." He began, his tone shifting. It was no longer the casual drawl of a garage worker. His voice carried a crisp, authoritative resonance. He built a private equity firm that specialized in acquiring distressed assets across the southern states. My father expanded it into commercial real estate and international logistics. We do not operate in the public eye. We do not attend the Houston charity circuits or pose for society magazines. We own the infrastructure that allows those society events to exist. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter. My knuckles turned white under the strain. You are not a caretaker, I whispered, the realization settling like a heavy stone in my stomach. No, Leo replied, holding my gaze. I am the sole heir. When my father passed away 4 years ago, I inherited the entire portfolio. I am the acting chairman of Vanguard. The words echoed in the narrow kitchen. Chairman. The man who drank cheap coffee from chipped ceramic mugs and spent his weekends under the chassis of rusted muscle cars was the head of a financial monolith. Why, I asked, my voice fracturing, why live like this? Why let my mother treat you like dirt on her shoe? Because I despise their world, he answered, stepping toward the kitchen table. I was raised in those suffocating boardrooms, Genevieve. I grew up surrounded by men in tailored suits who would slit their best friend's throat for a percentage point on a corporate merger. Everything was transactional. Every smile was a calculated investment. I learned to rebuild engines because machines made sense. When a part broke, you fixed it. When a person broke, in my world, you exploited them. I wanted a sanctuary away from the venom. I wanted a life that felt real. He pulled out one of the wooden dining chairs and sat down, resting his clean hands on the scratched tabletop. When I met you, he continued, his eyes softening, you were so entrenched in the Caldwell legacy. You were beautiful and brilliant, but you were trapped in Victoria's glass castle. I wanted you to love me, not for a balance sheet. When your mother delivered that ultimatum at the River Oaks Club, I watched you walk away from your entire inheritance just to hold my hand. It was the most profound thing I had ever witnessed. I knew then that you were the only person I could ever trust. His explanation was deeply romantic, but it clashed violently against the harsh reality of the last few weeks. I sold my designer dresses online to pay for our groceries, I said, the sting of betrayal rising in my throat. I sat at this exact table and cried because I thought the bank was going to repossess my restoration tools. I ate cheap noodles while you watched me panic over utility bills. You let me suffer, Leo. I never let you suffer, he countered, his tone urgent but controlled. I paid the equipment loan, Genevieve. I routed the funds through a blind shell account so the bank would mark it as a clerical extension. I bought your dresses back. They are hanging in a climate-controlled storage unit downtown. I never let you fall. I just let you think we were living a normal working-class life. Because I was terrified that if you knew the scope of my wealth, you would look at me the exact same way your mother does. He reached into the back pocket of his denim jeans. He pulled out a leather wallet and extracted a single card. He slid it across the scratched wooden table. It was a matte black corporate Centurion card. There were no limits attached to that dark, heavy plastic. It represented unfathomable, untraceable financial power. The card slid to a halt, resting perfectly adjacent to his discarded, oil-stained leather work gloves. The visual contrast was visceral. The gloves symbolized the humble, quiet life we had forged in our exile. The black card represented an empire that could buy the entire River Oaks district and pave it into a parking lot. I stared at the black rectangle. A chaotic storm of emotions raged inside my chest. I was furious that he had orchestrated such a profound deception. He had allowed me to carry the crushing weight of poverty when a single swipe of that card could have solved every problem. Yet beneath the raw anger, a different sensation began to take root. It was a cold, sharp awareness of the profound irony blanketing my existence. My mother had discarded me. Victoria Caldwell had thrown her own daughter away, declaring me unworthy of her reflection because she believed I had married beneath our station. She had sacrificed her flesh and blood upon the altar of high society status. She traded me away to preserve a fragile facade of wealth that was currently collapsing under the weight of margin calls and predatory loans. Victoria thought she had exiled a peasant. She did not know she had forced me into the arms of a king. I was standing in a modest Austin kitchen, possessing more liquid capital and corporate leverage than the entire Caldwell lineage combined. I had become the most powerful woman in Texas high society, and the elite circles did not even know my name. The supreme satisfaction of that reality washed over me an intoxicating rush of vindication that complicated the sting of my husband's deception. I looked up from the table, meeting Leo's steady gaze. The anger was still there, but the strategic clarity Maya had instilled in me began to sharpen my focus. I needed to test the boundaries of this new empire. I needed to know if the man sitting across from me was willing to use his unfathomable resources to help me fight a war he had spent his life avoiding. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the burner phone. I recalled the encrypted text Maya had sent mere minutes ago, the phantom investor preparing to rescue the Caldwell estate, the entity Victoria was planning to parade at her upcoming charity gala. "Leo," I said, tapping my finger against the edge of the matte black card, "you acquire distressed assets across the southern states. You operate through shell corporations and blind trusts." "Yes," he replied, his brow furrowing slightly. "My mother is currently drowning in corporate debt," I explained, keeping my eyes locked onto his. "Preston is liquidating the family art collection to cover the immediate shortfall. But Victoria thinks she is saved. She's secured a massive bailout from a private entity. She plans to announce the partnership at a lavish gala next month." Leo sat perfectly still. The quiet mechanic vanished entirely, replaced by the calculating chairman of Vanguard Holdings. "The entity rescuing her is called the Lone Star Heritage Trust," I said, letting the name hang in the tense air between us. "Tell me, Leo, does Vanguard Holdings own that trust?" My husband looked at the black card resting on the table. He did not blink. He did not look away. The silence stretched tight and brittle, pulling the final curtain away from the grand illusion. "Yes, Genevieve," he said softly. "We own it." 200 miles east of Austin, the Caldwell estate stood as a monument to profound denial. The River Oaks mansion was a sprawling architectural marvel of white columns and perfectly manicured hedges. But inside, the air felt thin and utterly toxic. Victoria Caldwell paced the length of her massive mahogany study. She held a heavy crystal tumbler of bourbon, her knuckles stark white against the faceted glass. Her financial empire was rapidly bleeding out, but Victoria completely refused to acknowledge the fatal wound. Instead, she chased phantoms. For several agonizing weeks, Victoria had convinced herself that her rapid economic decay was an orchestrated attack by an outside force. She focused all her paranoid energy on Silas Montgomery. Silas was a newly minted Houston software mogul who had recently outbid Victoria for a highly coveted commercial property downtown. In Victoria's rigid social hierarchy, software developers were uncultured upstarts who lacked pedigree. She could not accept the terrifying reality that her own reckless investments in barren petroleum leases and volatile technology startups had triggered her catastrophic margin calls. Her deep narcissism demanded a villain. She constructed an elaborate narrative where Silas was intentionally manipulating the market, shorting her real estate assets to ruin her elite standing. Driven by this manufactured paranoia, Victoria launched a relentless public relations offensive. She liquidated her remaining cash reserves to fund aggressive smear campaigns in elite society publications. She hosted lavish catered luncheons explicitly designed to turn the country club board against the Montgomery family. She was frantically pouring water into a sinking ship while aggressively polishing the mast. Every single dollar spent on preserving her optical dominance pushed her closer to actual bankruptcy. Maya stood near the towering oak bookshelves, watching her mother-in-law pace the Persian rug. Maya wore a sharply tailored navy suit, her natural hair pulled back into a severe professional knot. As a seasoned corporate litigator, she understood exactly how fast the Caldwell ship was plummeting toward the ocean floor. She also recognized the lethal stupidity of Victoria's current survival strategy. Maya picked up a thick stack of legal documents resting on the polished desk. These were the bailout papers from a private entity calling itself the Lone Star Heritage Trust. Preston sat in a high-backed leather chair, staring at the signature line on the final page. My brother looked physically exhausted. His expensive clothing hung loosely on his thinning frame. He was desperate for a lifeline, terrified of losing the generational prestige that defined his entire hollow identity. Victoria had secured this predatory loan completely blind. She heard the words Lone Star and Heritage and immediately assumed the capital originated from old guard Texas petroleum families. She believed an invisible network of traditional billionaires was stepping in to protect one of their own from the modern tech industry. Maya flipped to the 14th page of the heavy contract. Her sharp eyes scanned the dense legal jargon translating the corporate camouflage. She placed a perfectly manicured finger onto a specific, dense paragraph. "You cannot sign this, Preston," she warned, keeping her tone strictly objective and professional. "The acceleration clause is entirely predatory. If the Caldwell estate misses a single asset valuation threshold by even a fraction of a percent, this trust completely bypasses standard legal mediation. They claim immediate physical possession of all collateral, including this historic house. You are handing them a loaded gun with the safety removed." Victoria stopped pacing abruptly. She slammed her crystal tumbler onto the desk, splashing amber liquid across the polished wood. "Do not lecture my son on finance, Maya," she snapped, her voice dripping with aristocratic disdain. "You are a lawyer, not an investment banker. The Lone Star Trust represents the oldest, most respected families in the state. They operate on unspoken honor and mutual preservation. They are actively shielding us from that tech upstart Silas. They recognize our inherent value to the Houston ecosystem." Maya did not flinch at the racial and professional condescension lacing Victoria's bitter words. She had endured the matriarch's venom for years, navigating the suffocating microaggressions with total grace. Instead of fighting the delusional older woman, Maya looked directly at her husband. "Preston," she said softly, her voice carrying a final, desperate warning. "Read the exact wording on the default contingencies. There is no grace period allowed. There is no restructuring option available. Whoever drafted this document did not design it as a supportive loan. They designed it as a flawless trap. They want you to default. They are planning to consume you." Preston looked down at the towering stack of documents. He looked at the fierce, protective intelligence shining in his wife's eyes. Then he looked at the demanding glare of his furious mother. The choice was terrifyingly clear. He could defend his brilliant wife, acknowledge their financial failure, and face his mother's wrath. Or he could sign the papers, embrace the comfortable delusion, and momentarily secure his inheritance. Preston picked up a heavy gold fountain pen. He chose the path of least resistance, just as he always did. He signed his name on the dotted line, sealing the ultimate fate of the Caldwell Empire. Maya watched the black ink dry on the crisp paper, her expression smoothed into a mask of pure, cold detachment. She had genuinely tried to save them. She had offered her elite legal expertise to protect the family that constantly marginalized her existence. From this exact moment forward, she owed them nothing. The internal emotional tether binding her to the Caldwell legacy simply snapped, leaving behind a profound, liberating clarity. Victoria smiled a triumphant, predatory grin. She snatched the signed contract, clutching the thick paper to her chest like a protective shield. "We are saved," she declared, her chest heaving with arrogant relief. "The margin calls will be fully satisfied by tomorrow morning. We maintain our supreme status. We maintain our properties, and we will ensure that every single person in Houston knows the Caldwell family is untouchable." The sheer dramatic irony flooding the room was suffocating. Victoria truly believed she had outsmarted her imagined enemies. She truly believed she had secured a permanent partnership with traditional Texas royalty. She was utterly oblivious to the terrifying reality that the Lone Star Heritage Trust was a wholly owned subsidiary of Vanguard Holdings. The massive capital saving her mansion originated directly from the quiet mechanic she had violently banished from her sight. The contract her son just signed was drafted by the ruthless corporate attorneys answering directly to Leo Vanguard. Victoria walked over to the tall windows looking out over her sprawling, manicured lawns. She felt an intoxicating rush of complete superiority. Her deep narcissism required a public victory lap. Merely surviving was not enough for a woman of her stature. She needed to parade her survival in front of the people she deemed inferior. She needed to punish anyone who had ever doubted her unquestioned authority. "I need a new gown," Victoria announced, turning back toward the center of the room. "The Houston Heritage Gala is next month, and I intend to make it a glorious coronation. But before I meet with my tailors, I need to handle a minor errand." She walked over to her desk and picked up her platinum credit card, sliding it into her designer purse. "I am going shopping in the Gallery District tomorrow morning," she continued, her eyes gleaming with malice. "Geneviève has been suffocating in the slums long enough. It is time I paid my disgraced daughter a visit and showed her exactly what she gave up when she chose that mechanic over our legacy." Maya stood silently near the bookshelves, watching her mother-in-law plot her petty revenge. The brilliant litigator already knew the Lone Star contract was a ticking time bomb. She did not say a single word to stop Victoria from marching toward her own destruction. Maya quietly picked up her leather briefcase, walked out of the heavy mahogany doors, and began drafting her own personal exit strategy. Victoria was sprinting gleefully toward a financial guillotine, entirely convinced she was climbing a golden throne. The bell above the entrance of Maison de Soie chimed. The boutique sat in the center of the Houston luxury district, a sanctuary of imported fabrics and bespoke tailoring. The air inside smelled of white tea and polished cedar. I stood at the glass counter examining a roll of heavy archival linen and several yards of protective silk. I needed these specific historic weaves to bridge the torn fibers of my grandfather's maritime painting. The irony of the situation remained a constant companion. I was utilizing the limitless wealth of Vanguard Holdings to purchase materials to repair a canvas that my brother Preston intended to sell to save my mother from bankruptcy. The boutique manager Elise recognized me the moment I walked through the door. She was a sophisticated woman who catered strictly to the River Oaks demographic. 2 weeks ago, she would have treated me like royalty. Today, she offered a tight, nervous smile. She knew Victoria had issued a social blacklist against my name. Elise was terrified of losing the Caldwell account, but her professional courtesy forced her to process my request. I placed the required fabrics onto the glass counter. Elise tallied the total on her sleek digital register. The number was steep, reflecting the rare imported nature of the textiles. I reached into my purse and withdrew the matte black Vanguard corporate card Leo had given me. The physical weight of the dark plastic felt strange in my hand. It was unbranded, lacking the flashy logos of standard elite banking tiers. But Elise possessed a trained eye. She recognized the specific metal core and the discrete embedded chip associated with unlimited institutional capital. Her posture shifted instantly. The nervous tension evaporated, replaced by a profound, silent shock. She ran the chip through the terminal. The transaction cleared in less than a second, requiring no secondary authorization. As Elise carefully folded the silk, I noticed 3 manila folders resting near the edge of the register. They were layaway accounts. I knew Maison de Soie often allowed struggling young designers to reserve premium fabrics, paying them off in slow increments. It was a rare kindness in a ruthless industry. "Add the balances of those 3 accounts to my card," I instructed, keeping my voice low. Elise paused, her hands hovering over the delicate tissue paper. "Geneviève," she whispered, "those balances total thousands of dollars." "Process them," I replied, offering a gentle nod. Elise swiped the dark card a second time, a quiet transaction that would change 3 lives. I signed the electronic receipt, feeling a profound sense of peace. This was what true power felt like. Not the frantic, crushing dominance my mother demanded, but the quiet ability to lift a burden without seeking applause. The boutique door opened again. The soft chime echoed through the hushed showroom. The ambient energy in the room shifted immediately. It was a palpable change, like the sudden drop in barometric pressure before a severe storm. I turned toward the entrance and saw Victoria Caldwell stepping onto the polished marble floor. My mother was flanked by 2 of her most devoted country club peers. She wore a tailored crimson suit, her diamonds catching the recessed lighting. She projected an aura of total invincibility. She believed she had just secured a miraculous financial rescue from the Lone Star Heritage Trust. She believed her legacy was secured forever. Victoria spotted me standing near the register. Her eyes darted over my simple attire. I wore practical denim and a plain cotton blouse, a stark contrast to her calculated glamour. A cruel, performative smile spread across her face. This was her perfect stage. She had an audience, an enemy, and an inflated sense of supreme authority. "Genevieve, darling," Victoria called out, her voice projected to ensure every patron in the boutique heard her. "Are you lost?" I did not realize they allowed window shopping in this district. Her two companions exchanged hushed whispers, offering tight, pitying smiles. I stood my ground, holding my wrapped parcel of archival linen. "I am not lost, Mother," I answered, maintaining a steady, even tone. "I was just finishing a purchase." Victoria stepped closer, invading my personal space. She looked at the small, wrapped package in my hands and let out a soft, theatrical sigh. "It breaks my heart to see you living like this," she lied, the false sympathy dripping from every syllable. "You look exhausted. It must be so difficult pretending to be a commoner. If you would only listen to reason, you would not be scraping together pennies to buy scraps of fabric." I watched her perform. A month ago, her words would have wounded me deeply. They would have triggered the terrified child seeking her mother's approval. Now, I just saw a woman dancing blindly on the edge of a precipice. "Things are actually going very well," I replied, my expression remaining perfectly serene. Victoria laughed a sharp, brittle sound. "Please spare me the brave facade, Genevieve. Everyone in Houston knows you are struggling. But perhaps today is your lucky day. The Caldwell family is experiencing a season of unprecedented prosperity." She turned slightly, ensuring her peers were listening. "We just finalized a historic partnership with the Lone Star Heritage Trust," she announced, her chest swelling with unearned pride. "Traditional Texas capital stepping in to secure our rightful place at the top of the social hierarchy. It proves the true legacy is divinely protected. We are untouchable." The dramatic irony of her statement was a physical sensation. It crackled in the air between us. She was bragging about a financial lifeline provided directly by the very mechanic she had banished. She was boasting about a trust owned by the man whose surname I now carried. My mother was gleefully tightening a noose around her own neck and demanding I admire the craftsmanship of the rope. Because of this glorious windfall, Victoria continued reaching into her designer handbag. "I am feeling rather charitable. Allow me to purchase you a proper dress, something presentable. I cannot have my disgraced daughter wandering the streets looking like a vagrant. It reflects poorly on our flawless new image." She pulled out her shiny platinum card, holding it between two perfectly manicured fingers like a weapon. She waited for my reaction. She wanted tears. She wanted a desperate argument. She wanted me to scream and validate her perceived dominance. I looked at the shiny card, then up to her triumphant eyes. I felt no anger. I felt only a profound, chilling calm. I was the architect of her impending reality, and she had no idea. "No, thank you, Mother," I said, my voice soft but unyielding. "I have everything I need. I hope your upcoming gala is exactly what you deserve." I offered a polite nod to her stunned companions, turned and walked out of the glass doors. I did not rush. I maintained a steady, dignified pace, stepping into the warm Texas sunlight, leaving the toxic performance behind me. Inside the boutique, Victoria stood frozen, her outstretched hand still holding the platinum card. She blinked, the smile faltering as my refusal disrupted her carefully scripted triumph. She turned back toward the register, seeking validation from the boutique manager. "She always was painfully stubborn," Victoria remarked to Elise, attempting to recover her haughty composure. "Ring up a silk scarf for me, Elise. Put it on my account. The girl obviously cannot afford to care for herself." Elise stood behind the glass counter, her hands resting on the digital register. She looked at Victoria, then down at the 3 cleared layaway files. The manager possessed a strict code of professional discretion, but the sheer arrogance radiating from the Caldwell matriarch demanded a slight correction. "I do not think Genevieve is struggling, Victoria. Elise stated, her tone careful but firm. Victoria frowned. "What are you talking about? I just saw her buying cheap scraps." "She was purchasing highly specialized archival textiles," Elise corrected. "And before you arrived, your daughter requested the layaway files for 3 of our emerging designers. She paid their balances in full." Victoria stared at the manager, the words failing to process in her rigid mind. "Paid in full," she repeated. "That is thousands of dollars. How could she possibly afford that? Did she use credit?" "She used a corporate card." Elise replied, sliding the silk scarf into a pristine shopping bag, a black institutional tear. It cleared instantly, without a spending limit. The ambient hum of the boutique seemed to vanish. Victoria felt a cold, sharp spike of confusion pierce through her manufactured reality. The narrative she had constructed, the story of the destitute, exiled daughter begging for scraps, shattered against the polished marble floor. A black corporate card. Unlimited institutional capital. Victoria snatched the shopping bag from the counter, her hands trembling slightly. She looked toward the glass doors where I had exited. For the first time since she issued her devastating ultimatum at the River Oaks Club, Victoria Caldwell felt a distinct, terrifying shadow fall across her pristine glass castle. She did not know the shape of the storm gathering on the horizon, but the listener knows the trap is already set. And the Houston Heritage Gala is only days away. Maya sat in her corner office, overlooking the sprawling Houston skyline. As a brilliant African-American corporate litigator, she had spent her entire career navigating elite boardrooms explicitly designed to exclude her. She had built an unassailable professional reputation through flawless strategy and a ruthless intellect. Yet her mother-in-law constantly treated her like a temporary inconvenience. Victoria Caldwell viewed Maya not as a legal powerhouse, but as an unwelcome blemish on their traditional family portrait. Maya had tolerated the suffocating daily microaggressions because she genuinely loved her husband. But Preston had just signed their mutual financial death warrant. He had chosen his mother over his wife, leaving Maya to watch the estate crumble. The internal tether binding her to their legacy was completely broken. Maya stared at her dual computer monitors. She was conducting a deep forensic audit of the mysterious Lone Star Heritage Trust. The private entity possessed incredibly dense layers of corporate camouflage. It took her 3 hours to peel back the intricate shell corporations, holding companies, and blind offshore accounts. Her keystrokes were rhythmic and precise, slicing through the financial armor. Finally, the digital veil lifted completely. The trust was a wholly owned subsidiary of a massive private equity monolith. It traced back directly to Vanguard Holdings. Maya paused, letting the silence of her office wash over her. She opened a new secure search window and queried the executive board of Vanguard, the database populated with a single, prominent name for the acting chairman, Leo Vanguard. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. The quiet, humble mechanic her mother-in-law constantly degraded was actually the apex predator of the entire Texas financial ecosystem. Genevieve had not married a working-class peasant. She had married the absolute executioner of the Caldwell Empire. Maya let out a low, sharp laugh. It was a sound of pure, vindicated relief. She immediately began downloading every single document related to the Caldwell debt portfolio onto an encrypted portable drive. The morning sun beat down on the quiet, secluded patio of a small Austin cafe. I sat at a corner wooden table sipping dark black coffee. My phone had vibrated an hour ago with a secure, encrypted message from Maya requesting an immediate, in-person meeting. I had not seen my sister-in-law since the awful day I was permanently exiled from the family estate. She was always the only person in that sprawling, toxic mansion who possessed genuine moral clarity. Maya walked onto the patio wearing a sharp olive trench coat, her commanding presence shifting the energy of the space effortlessly. She slid into the wrought iron chair directly across from me. She did not offer casual small talk. She did not waste precious time with polite pleasantries. She told me she knew exactly who my husband was. She leaned forward, stating that she had successfully traced the Lone Star Capital to its true origin. She knew exactly who owned the lethal financial snare Preston had just blindly stepped into. I set my coffee cup down onto the saucer. My heart accelerated rapidly, but I kept my facial expression perfectly neutral. I asked her if she was there to warn them. I asked if she was planning to run back to Houston and tell Victoria that she had unknowingly sold her soul to the very man she banished. Maya slowly shook her head. A terrifyingly calm smile spread across her face. She told me she was there to help me pull the lever. Maya reached deep into her coat pocket. She extracted a heavy silver flash drive and slid it smoothly across the wooden table. The small metal device gleamed brightly in the morning sunlight. She explained that the drive contained the complete, unredacted Caldwell financial portfolio. It held records of every hidden account, every highly leveraged asset, and every desperate margin call Victoria had tried to desperately bury. Maya recounted watching her husband sign away his future the previous day because he was fundamentally too weak to stand against his arrogant mother. She expressed her absolute refusal to go down with their rapidly sinking ship. She had spent years playing the supportive background role while they actively diminished her powerful existence. She was finally choosing the winning side. I placed my hand firmly over the silver flash drive. The metal felt remarkably cool against my warm palm. The unspoken alliance forming between us felt monumental and historic. We were two strong women who had been chronically underestimated by the exact same oppressor. Victoria had discarded me because I chose authentic love over superficial status. She had marginalized Maya because of her race and her fierce independence. The Caldwell matriarch truly believed she ruled a kingdom of perfectly obedient subjects. She had absolutely no idea she had personally forged the exact weapons that would systematically dismantle her beloved throne. I noted the severity of her actions, stating that this was a total defection. I warned her that if Preston discovered she had handed me the literal blueprints to his total ruin, her marriage would be instantly over. Maya countered my warning with a profound, chilling certainty. She stated that her marriage ended the exact second Preston signed that predatory contract against her explicit legal counsel. Preston had married a partner, but he actually desired a subordinate. Maya reminded me she was a senior partner at a top-tier legal firm. She simply did not submit to failure. The tactical phase of our intense conversation began immediately. Maya transitioned flawlessly from an aggrieved family member to a lethal corporate strategist. She detailed how Victoria mistakenly thought the Lone Star Capital provided infinite breathing room. The matriarch was actively planning to host the massive Houston Heritage Gala in exactly 6 days. She fully intended to parade the recent bailout as a monumental social victory. But the specific contract Preston signed contained a highly lethal acceleration clause. The entire loan was precariously tied to the current valuation of their peripheral real estate holdings. I asked her to specify which exact holdings were vulnerable. She identified the commercial waterfront properties located in Galveston. If the appraised market value of those specific industrial docks dropped by merely 3%, the entire debt portfolio would instantly default. Vanguard Holdings could then legally seize the River Oaks mansion without scheduling a single court hearing. I looked down at the encrypted flash drive, fully understanding the flawless mechanics of the trap. Leo had designed the contract perfectly, but a natural market fluctuation of 3% usually required many months of slow economic shifting. We did not possess months. We had exactly 6 days until Victoria solidified her false victorious narrative at the upcoming gala. I realized aloud that we needed to force the sudden devaluation. We needed to artificially trigger the margin threshold before the party. Maya nodded sharply, her dark eyes gleaming with predatory intelligence. She confirmed my theory and pointed out that I currently held the unlimited Vanguard capital required to execute the maneuver. She instructed me to purchase the adjacent commercial properties through a blind proxy buyer. Once Vanguard secretly controlled the neighboring industrial lots, I needed to publicly announce a massive toxic waste remediation project. The mere public announcement of heavy industrial zoning next door would instantly tank the market valuation of the Caldwell waterfront assets. The margin call would trigger automatically and uncontrollably. The sheer strategic brilliance of the plan left me momentarily breathless. It was entirely legal, beautifully clean, and absolutely devastating. I was no longer merely surviving the bitter fallout of my unfair exile. I was actively hunting. Guided by the brilliant legal mind my mother had tried to crush, I was preparing to efficiently sever the final vital artery of the Caldwell empire. I securely pocketed the silver drive, feeling a massive surge of raw adrenaline. I told Maya we had a highly actionable plan. I promised to have Leo finalize the proxy land purchases by the following morning. By the time Victoria confidently stepped onto the ballroom floor at her lavish gala, the official foreclosure documents would already be processing in the background. Maya suddenly shifted her expression to one of severe, anxious urgency. She warned me that while the grand financial trap was perfectly set, Preston was getting incredibly desperate on a secondary front. I guessed she was referring to the anonymous art sale, remembering the fragile maritime painting currently resting in my garage workspace. Maya confirmed my suspicion. The private art broker was aggressively demanding physical verification of the restored canvas tonight. Preston knew he could not delay the wealthy buyer any longer, but he desperately wanted to avoid paying my anonymous shell company the final expensive restoration fee. He was currently drowning in massive personal debts that Victoria flatly refused to cover. He needed the entire sum of the upcoming art sale just to keep his own dangerous creditors at bay. A cold, heavy knot formed rapidly in my stomach. I asked Maya what my brother was secretly planning to do. She revealed that Preston was not coming to the house to pay the invoice. She dropped her voice to a harsh, serious whisper, explaining that he had illegally tracked the internet protocol address of my shell company Communications. He knew the restoration workshop was located somewhere in the quiet Austin suburbs. Preston had secretly hired 2 private security contractors. Maya warned me these men were not legitimate art brokers. They were violent fixers. My brother fully intended to aggressively steal the painting back tonight, to completely avoid paying the final bill. The terrifying reality of her urgent words crashed over me. The abstract, high-level corporate warfare had suddenly mutated into an immediate physical threat. My own brother was dispatching criminals directly to my personal home. Maya stood up, adjusting the collar of her olive coat. She instructed me to secure that delicate canvas immediately. If Preston managed to get his hands on the valuable painting, he would secure an independent cash lifeline that might delay the impending foreclosure. She looked at me fiercely, demanding that I could not let him win this crucial round. Maya turned and walked briskly away, leaving me sitting completely alone on the sunlit cafe patio. The heavy flash drive burned a hole in my jacket pocket. I possessed the ultimate weapon needed to permanently destroy my arrogant mother, but the brutal war had just suddenly arrived directly at my front door. I pulled out my cellular phone and immediately dialed Leo. The line rang twice before he answered, his voice a calm anchor in the rising storm. I told him we had a massive problem as I began sprinting toward my parked car. I explained that Preston was sending dangerous men to our house tonight. I told my husband we needed to prepare the garage immediately for a confrontation. The line remained totally quiet for a fraction of a second. Then Leo spoke, his deep tone radiating pure, icy authority. He simply told me to let them come. The physical threat my brother dispatched never even reached our front door. Leo possessed resources far beyond my initial comprehension. Long before the hired mercenaries of Preston could breach our quiet suburban street, a perimeter team of Vanguard Enterprise Security intercepted their vehicle. The confrontation was completely silent and decisively swift. The violent fixers were politely redirected back to Houston, with a severe legal warning ensuring they would never accept another assignment from the Caldwell family. The delicate maritime painting remained securely untouched in my garage workspace. That swift, invisible neutralization of a physical danger fundamentally shifted my understanding of my husband. He was not merely wealthy. He wielded an insulated tactical supremacy that rendered my family and their desperate maneuvers utterly obsolete. The next morning, we abandoned the working class illusion completely. I rode beside Leo in the back of a blacked-out luxury sedan, ascending toward the gleaming glass monolith that housed the true Vanguard Holdings headquarters in downtown Austin. We stepped out of the private elevator and entered a sprawling executive suite occupying the entire top floor. The space lacked the ostentatious antique clutter my mother aggressively preferred. Instead, it projected a cold, austere power. Vast floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the sprawling cityscape below. Dark walnut panels lined the walls, intersecting with brushed steel accents. It was a fortress designed for absolute fiscal domination. We sat at a grand conference table constructed from a single slab of polished obsidian. 2 senior attorneys flanked us, their expressions devoid of any readable emotion. They slid a thick, leather-bound portfolio across the smooth surface. These were the finalized proxy transfer documents. Leo was formally transferring total autonomous control of the Lone Star Heritage Trust debt directly into my name. He was willingly handing me the exact financial guillotine required to execute my family. My husband leaned back in his tailored charcoal suit, watching me with steady, unwavering trust. He had built this vast empire to escape toxic greed, yet he was freely giving me the keys to his kingdom so I could secure my own justice. I picked up the writing instrument provided by the senior counsel. It was a heavy gold fountain pen, its polished surface cool against my skin. I held the thick barrel between my thumb and index finger. The sheer weight of the object felt incredibly foreign. I had spent my adult life meticulously wielding delicate sable brushes and featherweight solvent applicators to preserve history. Those familiar restoration tools were designed for gentle healing and careful preservation. This gleaming golden instrument was designed exclusively for destruction. As I pressed the nib against the thick, textured vellum, the sharp scratching sound echoed loudly in the cavernous room. Every single stroke of my signature permanently erased another structural segment of the Caldwell legacy. I was actively dismantling the aristocratic foundation that had raised me. A sudden, suffocating wave of societal guilt washed over me. I paused, leaving the final, crucial document unsigned. I stared at the dense legal paragraphs detailing the impending foreclosure of the River Oaks estate. My mother was deeply toxic and fiercely narcissistic, but she was still the woman who had brought me into this world. Deeply ingrained conditioning fought against my newfound strategic clarity. American culture often demanded daughters remain unconditionally loyal to their maternal figures, regardless of the emotional abuse inflicted upon them. I was preparing to push my own family into total public bankruptcy. The sheer cruelty of the act terrified me. I wondered if executing this ruthless maneuver would ultimately turn me into the exact type of venomous creature I despised. I placed the gold pen onto the table, my hand trembling slightly. The tense silence in the boardroom shattered when my cellular phone vibrated aggressively in my jacket pocket. I withdrew the device and saw a secure, encrypted notification from my brilliant sister-in-law. Maya had proven her steadfast loyalty yesterday at the cafe, and she continued to monitor the enemy camp with flawless precision. Maya had always been an outsider in the Caldwell household. Despite graduating at the top of her law school class and securing a senior partnership before her 30th birthday, her African-American heritage and self-made success made her a perpetual target for the subtle bigotry of Victoria. My mother preferred submissive ornaments, not intellectual equals. Maya endured the slights because she loved Preston, but watching him capitulate to financial suicide finally broke her restraint. She channeled years of suppressed indignity into this masterful industrial espionage. Her flawless intelligence gathering had delivered the ultimate ammunition directly into my hands. I opened the message. It contained a short, compressed audio file intercepted from the internal security network inside the Caldwell mansion. I pressed play, holding the small speaker close to my ear. The voice of my mother flooded the receiver, sharp and dripping with unfiltered venom. She was dictating the opening remarks for her highly anticipated charity gala to her personal assistant. Victoria was practicing her triumphant performance. The audio recording captured her explicit intent to leverage my absence as a comedic anecdote. She bragged extensively about the huge influx of capital from her mysterious saviors. Then she launched into a vicious, unprovoked attack against my marriage. She called Leo a filthy, opportunistic parasite. She described my departure as a necessary purging of genetic weakness from their elite bloodline. She instructed her assistant to ensure the society photographers captured her laughing while delivering the punchline about my supposed descent into working-class poverty. She intended to use my public humiliation as the ultimate decorative centerpiece for her victorious celebration. The recording clicked off, leaving a deafening void in my mind. The lingering guilt that had paralyzed my hand just moments ago instantly evaporated. It burned away, leaving nothing but a pure, crystallized fury. Victoria possessed zero remorse. She viewed my existence merely as a convenient prop to elevate her own fragile social standing. She had traded her daughter for a temporary illusion of power, and now she planned to dance on the grave of my reputation. The psychological conflict vanished entirely, replaced by a cold, mechanical resolve. I picked up the heavy gold fountain pen once more. My grip was absolute and completely devoid of hesitation. I pressed the sharp metal nib against the final sheet of vellum, signing my name with forceful, deliberate strokes. The transaction was officially complete. The Vanguard attorneys gathered the leather portfolio, sealing the legal fate of the Caldwell empire. I now possessed total autonomous control over the entire debt structure. I owned the mansion. I owned the sprawling Galveston waterfront properties. I owned the very ground my mother intended to stand upon during her magnificent gala. The overlapping conflicts of hostile acquisition, bitter family betrayal, and toxic social hierarchy had finally locked seamlessly into place. I looked across the dark obsidian table, meeting the steady gaze of my husband. The trap was fully wound and legally binding. But possessing the weapon was merely the preliminary step. The true challenge lay in the execution. Maya had provided the perfect strategy to force the margin call by manipulating the adjacent commercial zoning. We needed to formally announce the toxic waste remediation project to plummet the property values. However, the timing required flawless surgical precision. If we triggered the severe market devaluation too early, Victoria might find a desperate way to pivot. If we triggered it too late, the gala would conclude and she would successfully solidify her false narrative among the Houston elite. We had to detonate the financial bomb exactly as she took the grand stage. The final showdown was no longer a distant possibility. It was an impending collision set to occur in front of hundreds of the most powerful people in Texas. Now I had to decide how to present myself at the epicenter of the destruction. I could not simply arrive at the Houston Heritage Gala dressed in my comfortable Austin denim. I needed armor. I needed a visual representation of the Vanguard power that now flowed through my veins. The dress Elise had sold me yesterday at the boutique was elegant, but it was not a weapon. I required something that would completely paralyze the ballroom the moment I stepped through the double doors. I asked the senior attorneys to leave the room. Once the heavy wooden doors clicked shut, I turned to Leo. He was already smiling, recognizing the dangerous spark reigniting in my eyes. The battleground was chosen, the financial explosives were primed, and the guest list was finalized. Now we just had to ensure the executioner arrived in breathtaking style. The atmosphere inside the sprawling River Oaks estate mirrored a frantic theatrical production operating at maximum capacity. Victoria Caldwell stood in the grand foyer, directing a massive army of event planners with the ruthless precision of a military general. Tonight was the Houston Heritage Gala, and she viewed the monumental social gathering as her personal royal coronation. The matriarch had spent the previous 48 hours executing a highly aggressive public relations campaign designed to completely rewrite her recent catastrophic economic failures. She continuously leaked carefully crafted rumors to various elite society columns, hinting at an exclusive permanent partnership with old guard Texas oil money. She fully intended to use the lavish charity event to publicly reassert her total, absolute dominance over the Southern aristocracy. She planned to proudly unveil the Lone Star Heritage Trust as her permanent financial shield. Completely unaware, she was meticulously decorating the exact room where she would be publicly executed. Dozens of hired workers scurried across the imported marble floors carrying heavy wooden crates of crystal stemware and polished silver serving platters. A renowned culinary team from a prestigious downtown restaurant was already occupying the massive commercial kitchen, preparing pounds of rare imported beluga caviar and delicate Wagyu beef tartare. 4 classically trained musicians sat in the corner of the vast ballroom, practicing a complex Baroque symphony, their wooden bows moving in perfect, flawless unison. The conditioned air smelled intensely of expensive lemon polish and thousands of blooming rare white orchids. Victoria demanded absolute, flawless perfection from every single contractor stepping foot inside her territory. She thrived on the suffocating, toxic arrogance that permeated her exclusive guest list, knowing the most powerful politicians and corporate titans in the state would soon walk through her towering mahogany doors. The furious matriarch marched aggressively toward a trembling floral designer who was desperately trying to construct a massive, cascading botanical centerpiece near the main sweeping staircase. The young vendor looked completely physically exhausted, her bare hands stained dark green from stripping countless thorny stems. Victoria inspected the elaborate floral arrangement with a look of profound, visceral disgust. She informed the terrified vendor that the white roses lacked the required visual volume and loudly accused her of sourcing cheap, inferior blossoms. The older woman raised her voice, her tone sharp and intensely degrading, echoing off the high vaulted ceilings. She viciously berated the young florist for perceived incompetence, threatening to ruin her small business reputation across the entire metropolitan area if the display was not immediately replaced with premium, flawless specimens. Maya stood quietly in the adjacent formal dining room, observing the cruel, unprovoked interaction from the dark shadows. As an African-American woman raised by hard-working public school teachers in a modest suburban neighborhood, she possessed a deep, fundamental respect for working-class labor. Her dedicated parents had sacrificed their entire meager savings to ensure she could attend a prestigious Ivy League law school. She had spent her entire adult life building a formidable corporate legal career based entirely on genuine intellectual merit and relentless personal dedication. Watching her incredibly wealthy mother-in-law verbally decimate a struggling independent vendor over the minor diameter of a single rose petal filled her with a cold, quiet disgust. Victoria felt supremely entitled to destroy any person positioned beneath her perceived social station because she mistakenly believed her own financial foundation was permanently secure. Maya slowly sipped her sparkling water, her elegant expression remaining completely, carefully neutral. She alone possessed the terrifying hidden knowledge that the aggressive matriarch screaming at the hired staff would not even legally own the historic mansion by the stroke of midnight. The brilliant corporate attorney smoothly retreated into the private, dusty library, closing the heavy, solid oak doors securely behind her. She approached the massive antique wooden desk and quickly opened her sleek leather briefcase. Operating flawlessly as the ultimate embedded inside agent, Maya had leveraged her established status as the wife of the Caldwell heir to secure the absolute highest level of security clearance for the evening event. She extracted 2 heavy gold foil envelopes containing the coveted all-access premium credentials. These highly specific passes bypassed the standard crowded guest registry entirely, allowing the chosen bearer to enter strictly through the restricted executive corridors of the downtown ballroom. She slipped the rigid passes into a discreet courier pouch and requested an immediate, secure delivery to a specified, highly guarded location in Austin. 200 miles away, I sat in the silent, refined sanctuary of my husband and his towering private penthouse. The requested courier arrived exactly on schedule, handing me the thick, soft velvet package. I carefully broke the red wax seal and slid the heavy gold lanyards onto the polished glass coffee table. The physical access passes represented the final, crucial logistical key required to successfully breach the impenetrable fortress my mother had constructed. The sheer, raw anticipation buzzing deep in my chest reached a dizzying, intoxicating fever pitch. For 2 long, agonizing years, I had existed as a silent ghost, completely erased from the official family narrative, simply because I bravely refused to marry a wealthy, aristocratic heir. Tonight, I was finally returning, not as a broken, desperate exile seeking maternal forgiveness, but as the absolute sole owner of their entire fiscal existence. Leo quietly entered the expansive living room, adjusting the crisp, dark cuffs of his immaculate midnight blue tuxedo. He looked incredibly, intensely dangerous, his calm, steady demeanor radiating a lethal, quiet, corporate authority. He noticed the VIP credentials resting on the glass table and offered a brief, subtle, approving nod. We had spent the entire early morning finalizing the complex legal corporate maneuvers strictly required to officially trigger the massive real estate devaluation in Galveston. The devastating toxic waste remediation announcements were perfectly primed, continuously awaiting my direct verbal command to release into the global public sector. The heavy internal spring of the financial trap was wound as tight as physically possible. Every single economic variable was mathematically accounted for and flawlessly positioned for maximum destruction. I stood up and walked purposefully toward the grand master bedroom to begin my own visual transformation. The physical preparation process felt exactly like donning ancient heavy armor before a brutal, catastrophic war. I absolutely could not arrive looking like the humble, quiet art restorer they so eagerly, continually despised. I fundamentally needed to project the immense, invisible, terrifying power of Vanguard Holdings. The custom dress I deliberately selected from the elite Houston boutique was a true masterpiece of structural, imported silk and severe, sharp lines. It was a deep, pure obsidian black, completely devoid of bright, cheerful colors or frivolous, decorative embellishments. It was a heavy, solemn garment, explicitly designed for mourning, and I fully intended to wear it proudly to the public funeral of the Caldwell family empire. As I slowly fastened a simple, heavy diamond necklace around my throat, my cellular phone vibrated aggressively on the marble vanity mirror. I answered the encrypted secure line, fully expecting another routine, minor update from my brilliant sister-in-law. Instead, the recorded voice of Maya crackled through the small speaker, sounding incredibly tense and highly, frantically hurried. She informed me that a sudden, massive, unexpected complication had just materialized at the primary downtown venue. Preston had apparently suffered a massive, severe psychological panic attack regarding his unpaid anonymous art restoration debt. He was completely terrified the wealthy anonymous buyer would discover the missing canvas and immediately launch a massive federal fraud investigation against him. To actively mitigate his escalating frantic paranoia, my severely desperate brother had independently hired a private paramilitary security firm to heavily supplement the standard gala personnel. These armed, intense, independent contractors were currently actively locking down the entire outer perimeter of the downtown venue. They were aggressively implementing a rigorous secondary identification protocol, utilizing highly advanced facial recognition software at every single entry point. Maya specifically warned me that the gold foil credentials would no longer grant automatic anonymous entry to the building. My terrified brother had inadvertently built a massive, impenetrable digital wall around the charity event, effectively locking me out of my own carefully orchestrated ambush. The sudden, shocking revelation violently disrupted the perfect, steady rhythm of our master plan. The tension in the quiet room spiked instantly, creating a heavy, suffocating, dark dread. The ticking, invisible clock driving us relentlessly toward the evening confrontation suddenly felt incredibly oppressive and incredibly fast. Victoria was currently confidently marching into a magnificent ballroom she would soon lose, completely oblivious to the impending, brutal slaughter waiting in the shadows. I absolutely needed to be physically standing inside that specific room when the financial bomb detonated to personally ensure she understood exactly who pulled the fatal trigger. But safely navigating through a dense, hostile gauntlet of private armed mercenaries required an entirely new, brilliant tactical approach. I clearly relayed the urgent, dangerous security update to Leo, who was standing quietly near the open doorway, closely observing my reflection in the bright mirror. He did not flinch panic or display even a microscopic fraction of genuine concern. The true apex predator of the Texas corporate ecosystem merely calmly adjusted his dark silk tie. He stepped smoothly forward, placing a warm, strong, reassuring hand on my bare shoulder. He calmly stated that if the standard entry doors were illegally barricaded by frightened little men, we would simply purchase the entire commercial building and walk proudly through the front gate as the new absolute landlords. The brilliant solution immediately suggested a brand new, highly aggressive conflict, elevating the stakes far beyond a simple domestic family ambush. We were no longer just crashing a prestigious party. We were actively preparing to launch a hostile corporate takeover of the physical ground itself. The listener feels the raw, electrifying, dark anticipation, knowing the ultimate public confrontation is merely brief hours away, and the impending level of devastation will be absolutely breathtaking. The massive transaction finalized just before sunset. Leo did not merely secure entry to the exclusive venue he purchased, the entire commercial holding company that owned the historic River Oaks Grand Hall. This brilliant, decisive maneuver completely neutralized my brother and his frantic paramilitary barricade. We arrived at the magnificent building riding in absolute silence inside a sleek, armored vehicle. The imposing structure loomed against the dark night sky, an architectural monument to extreme Southern wealth. Stepping out onto the pristine red carpet, I felt a profound electric surge pulsing through my veins. The humid evening air clung to my dark structural gown. My husband walked securely beside me, his presence an immovable anchor amidst the impending chaos. He wore a profoundly understated charcoal garment crafted by legendary Savile Row tailors. The bespoke masterpiece completely eschewed flashy branding or loud, obnoxious embellishments. It whispered of unfathomable old-world wealth, projecting an intrinsic supreme authority that commanded immediate absolute respect. We approached the towering brass entrance doors, bypassing the long, chaotic line of nervous arriving guests. A heavy wall of imposing private guards blocked the primary threshold. These were the aggressive mercenaries Preston had desperately hired to keep me locked outside. Their broad shoulders and severe tactical uniforms contrasted sharply with the elegant, formal attire worn by the wealthy attendees. The formidable team leader stood firmly blocking our path, his arms crossed tightly over his massive chest. He demanded our VIP credentials, his voice a low, threatening rumble. Instead of producing the golden foil passes my sister-in-law had successfully smuggled to us, Leo slowly reached into his interior jacket pocket. He retrieved a simple, solid black identification card, forged from dense aerospace-grade titanium. He handed the heavy metal square directly to the giant commanding guard. The seasoned tactical contractor glanced downward, expecting to see a standard fake invitation. The precise moment the brawny man processed the small, engraved Vanguard corporate insignia resting securely in his palm, his entire physical demeanor violently shifted. The hostile, aggressive posture instantly evaporated. All the blood rapidly drained from his weathered face, leaving him appearing remarkably pale and deeply, visibly shaken. As a highly trained private security professional operating at the absolute pinnacle of the elite global protection industry, he recognized the immense, terrifying magnitude of that specific insignia. He knew with absolute certainty that Vanguard Holdings possessed enough liquid capital to permanently erase his entire contracting firm before morning. The imposing guard respectfully bowed his head, returning the titanium card with trembling fingers. He immediately barked a sharp command, instructing his heavily armed unit to stand down and swiftly open the heavy brass doors. We glided smoothly into the breathtaking cavernous interior. The main ballroom represented a true, flawless masterclass in ostentatious Texas excess. Hundreds of prominent billionaires, influential politicians, and wealthy, desperate socialites crowded the massive, expansive floor. They were entirely drowning in flashy, oversized diamonds and extremely loud, aggressive designer labels. The deafening ambient noise of clinking champagne flutes and shallow, performative laughter bounced sharply against the towering vaulted ceilings. Intricate, shimmering crystal chandeliers bathed the enormous room in a warm golden glow, while massive, cascading arrangements of rare white orchids aggressively perfumed the stale, circulated air. I scanned the chaotic, moving crowd, searching for the specific target of my impending financial vengeance. My African-American sister-in-law, Maya, stood quietly near a towering marble pillar, offering me a brief, subtle nod of profound solidarity. She had successfully infiltrated the gathering hours ago, securing a perfect vantage point to witness the ultimate destruction of the toxic hierarchy that had continuously sought to crush her brilliant spirit. Suddenly, a violent, sharp ripple of disruption tore rapidly across the crowded room. The dense sea of glittering partygoers instinctively parted, revealing the undisputed reigning monarch of the Houston elite. Victoria Caldwell spotted us standing calmly near the main entrance, her perfectly manufactured smile completely shattered, instantly replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated, venomous rage. My deeply narcissistic mother had spent the entire agonizing week meticulously orchestrating this lavish public coronation. She fully intended to utilize the highly publicized charity event to reassert her total, absolute dominance over the Southern aristocracy. Seeing her banished, estranged daughter proudly crossing her sacred threshold completely shattered her carefully constructed illusion of supreme control. She firmly believed she had permanently exiled me to a pathetic, miserable existence of desperate poverty. Victoria marched furiously across the polished parquet floor, her expensive crimson heels clicking loudly, sharply, echoing like miniature gunshots. She aggressively signaled a secondary team of interior event security, desperately ordering them to immediately flank her position. She fully intended to publicly humiliate us by violently throwing us out onto the cold street in front of the entire stunned Houston elite. The thick, suffocating tension in the room rapidly escalated to a dizzying, terrifying fever pitch as nearby guests stopped talking completely, eagerly turning to watch the impending dramatic family slaughter. You possess an incredible, shocking amount of sheer audacity showing your face in this building, Victoria hissed venomously, her voice trembling with raw, unfiltered fury. She stopped mere inches from my face, her eyes darting frantically between my stark morning gown and the calm, silent man standing beside me. This is a highly exclusive private gathering designed strictly for individuals of true substance and legacy. You have absolutely no right to pollute my flawless evening with your pathetic working-class presence. I did not flinch, cower, or offer a desperate, tearful apology. I simply stared deeply into her cold, angry eyes, feeling an immense, profound sense of pure, liberating detachment. The frightened little girl, who constantly craved her elusive maternal validation, was completely, permanently dead. I was now the executioner, bringing swift, undeniable justice to a rotting, corrupt empire. Remove these filthy, trespassing vagrants immediately, Victoria loudly commanded, spinning around to face the interior head of security. Throw them both directly into the gutter where they rightfully belong. I want them aggressively, permanently banned from ever stepping foot inside this zip code again. Do you understand me? The interior security chief, a tall, nervous man wearing a standard black suit, stepped hesitantly forward. He reached out to grab my shoulder, fully intending to obey the ruthless Caldwell matriarch. Leo moved with blinding, terrifying speed. He did not raise his voice or utilize any physical violence. He simply smoothly positioned himself firmly between me and the reaching guard. My husband raised his right hand, presenting the heavy black titanium Vanguard identification card directly into the line of sight of the nervous chief. The reaction was identical to the mercenary at the front door, but significantly more pronounced. The interior manager recognized the ultimate parent company that currently held every single massive debt contract attached to the Caldwell family estate. He knew Vanguard owned the very floorboards he was currently standing upon. The terrified man gasped audibly, snatching his hand back as if he had just accidentally touched a scorching iron stove. He took 3 rapid, stumbling steps backward, completely ignoring the frantic screaming demands of my furious mother. He lowered his eyes deeply, refusing to make direct eye contact with Leo, clearly, silently submitting to the true, absolute ruler of the room. Victoria stood, completely frozen, her outstretched arms suspended awkwardly in the empty space. She turned her head slowly, staring blankly at the terrified, cowering security guard. Her brain violently struggled to comprehend the completely impossible reality unfolding directly in front of her. For her entire privileged adult life, her harsh-spoken commands were absolute, unquestionable law. Her immense perceived power was the very foundation of her entire personal identity. Now, her trusted hired muscle was actively, openly defying her direct, explicit orders to pacify a quiet, unassuming man she had consistently brutally mocked as a poor common laborer. A brand new, deeply terrifying conflict instantly sparked behind her widening eyes. She looked back at me, her arrogant confidence rapidly dissolving into genuine, creeping horror. She suddenly realized she was entirely, completely defenseless. I watched her perfectly painted lips part slightly as the heavy, crushing weight of true powerlessness finally began to violently suffocate her. The trap was incredibly securely locked. The entire prominent audience was silently watching, and my husband gracefully offered me his arm so we could casually stroll toward the center stage. Geneviève walked gracefully alongside her quiet husband, stepping away from the chaotic foyer entrance and moving deeply into the breathtaking, cavernous ballroom. The sheer, suffocating opulence of the historic River Oaks venue felt incredibly oppressive. Victoria Caldwell desperately attempted to salvage her rapidly shattering dignity following the disastrous security failure. The imposing, angry matriarch quickly pivoted her rigid body away from the public confrontation. She harshly commanded her remaining terrified staff to immediately initiate the formal evening presentation. Victoria possessed a deeply ingrained, toxic belief that any catastrophic social disaster could be permanently erased by deploying a sufficiently grand, glamorous spectacle. Raised among the wealthiest elite families in northern Dallas, she learned quite early that superficial perception always conquered objective reality. Her ruthless father had meticulously taught her to simply smile brightly through any impending corporate bankruptcy. She fully intended to apply that exact, dangerous lesson tonight. Geneviève felt the heavy, dark silk fabric of her structural morning gown brush softly against the polished, imported parquet floor. The impending, ultimate confrontation loomed incredibly large in her focused mind. A brand new, immediate problem suddenly surfaced when she noticed her anxious brother Preston frantically pacing near the lavish catering tables. His pale face was slick with cold sweat. He constantly checked his encrypted cellular device, clearly realizing his hired private mercenaries had utterly failed to secure the building perimeter. Preston represented the ultimate tragic casualty of the rigid Caldwell lineage. He was meticulously groomed from birth to eventually inherit a sprawling empire, but he fundamentally lacked the calculating intellect required to successfully maintain it. He possessed a weak, nervous constitution, constantly seeking elusive validation from a demanding mother who only truly valued pure financial dominance. Seeing Geneviève and Leo effortlessly breach his impenetrable armed security net pushed the desperate heir toward a total psychological collapse. He violently grabbed a passing uniformed waiter, taking a heavy crystal glass of expensive bourbon and consuming the burning amber liquid instantly. Preston slowly turned his head and intensely locked eyes with his estranged sister. A brief, silent standoff occurred across the densely crowded, shimmering ballroom. Genevieve simply offered a detached, emotionless stare. She knew his anonymous art fraud scheme was collapsing simultaneously with the family debt structure. He forcefully threw his empty glass onto a silver serving tray. He immediately stormed toward the rear emergency exit, abandoning his formidable, arrogant mother to face the impending, brutal slaughter entirely alone. A loud, pleasant chime echoed clearly through the sophisticated hidden sound system. The murmuring, dense crowd of prominent billionaires and highly influential politicians slowly directed their collective, undivided attention toward the elevated grand stage. The wide platform was meticulously draped in lush crimson velvet. A towering, solid mahogany wooden podium stood firmly anchored in the exact center. Directly behind the sturdy, imposing lectern hung an enormous, mysterious object concealed by a shimmering, opaque silver silk drape. Victoria marched confidently up the carpeted stairs, her physical posture unnaturally rigid and heavily practiced. She grabbed the slender black microphone with visibly trembling fingers. Her tight knuckles turned pale white from the immense physical pressure she applied. Genevieve stood perfectly still, watching the cornered woman prepare to deliver the most important, fabricated public narrative of her privileged life. Leo remained motionless beside his focused wife. He was a deeply private man who had built the vast Vanguard holdings from fundamental scratch. He grew up witnessing the devastating, cruel impact of predatory lending on vulnerable working communities. He utilized his unparalleled mathematical mind to conquer the elite global financial world, explicitly to systematically dismantle corrupt wealthy dynasties from the inside out. He watched the Caldwell matriarch with a calm, cold, deeply calculating gaze. The proud matriarch forced a flawless, radiant smile onto her tense face. Her practiced, clear voice projected easily across the expansive, silent room. She warmly welcomed the esteemed, wealthy guests, profusely thanking them for their continuous, unwavering, generous support of the traditional Southern aristocracy. Victoria quickly transitioned her elegant speech to the core, central subject of her frantic public relations campaign. She boldly, falsely announced that the historic estate had successfully, expertly navigated recent, complex, economic turbulent waters. She proudly declared the formation of a monumental, historic partnership. She spun a magnificent, victorious, elaborate tale describing the mysterious Lone Star Heritage Trust as a trusted old money ally. She painted a vivid, compelling picture of mutual respect and shared conservative values. Genevieve felt a sharp, twisting knot of visceral disgust listening to the flowing lies. Victoria was actively, boldly attempting to weaponize her own impending bankruptcy, transforming a fatal structural weakness into a triumphant, glorious display of supposed strategic brilliance. The confident speaker dramatically raised her right hand, gesturing broadly, widely toward the large, concealed banner positioned directly behind her elevated stance. This was the precise moment the invisible, heavy financial guillotine would finally mercilessly drop. Victoria instructed the invisible technical staff to release the thick holding cables. She loudly proclaimed that the family currently stood united with the powerful Lone Star banking institution. The heavy silver silk drape smoothly, swiftly slid downward, falling onto the wooden floor with a soft, quiet thud. She fully expected to see a standard conservative, boring banking logo displayed brightly against the pristine white canvas backdrop. She deeply anticipated rapturous applause and profound, immediate social validation from her peers. Genevieve held her breath, feeling the raw, crackling electric anticipation saturating the heavily circulated indoor air. The sponsor banner absolutely did not display the expected Lone Star corporate name. The bold, sharp, geometric silver crest of Vanguard Holdings loomed ominously, largely, over the entire shocked ballroom. The imposing, terrifying corporate emblem was instantly recognizable to every single prominent fiscal operator currently occupying the enormous space. A profound, deafening silence forcefully swept over the packed crowd. The absolute quiet was so incredibly profound, it felt physically crushing and deeply suffocating. The elite attendees stared blankly confused at the towering corporate crest, unable to mentally process the shocking, jarring visual contradiction. Vanguard was globally infamous for conducting lethal hostile takeovers. They were the undisputed apex predators of the modern private equity sector. The crystalline, terrifying shatter of thin, delicate glass violently broke the tense silence. Victoria had dropped her imported crystal champagne flute directly onto the hard-polished stage. The dangerous pieces scattered randomly, widely across the soft velvet carpet. The terrified woman turned her stiff neck slowly, gazing upward at the looming, threatening banner. All the vibrant, warm color rapidly drained from her perfectly manicured, aged face. Her radiant, fake smile collapsed into a twisted, horrifying expression of pure, unadulterated, genuine terror. The overarching psychological conflict reached its undeniable zenith. Leo gently released his protective hold on the delicate arm of his wife. He stepped smoothly, gracefully out of the stunned audience. The thick sea of paralyzed billionaires instinctively rapidly parted, creating a clear, unobstructed path for the unassuming, mysterious man. He did not rush, sprint, or display any vulgar, triumphant arrogance. He simply walked, with the supreme authority of a reigning victorious monarch surveying his newly conquered, devastated territory. He slowly ascended the plush stairs, steadily approaching the mahogany podium. Victoria, physically violently recoiled, stumbling awkwardly backward until her shaking shoulders hit the solid, cold metal frame of the display banner. She stared widely at the beautiful, bespoke Savile Row suit covering the exact man she had viciously, constantly, cruelly mocked. Her racing mind finally, agonizingly, connected the devastating, disparate puzzle pieces. The humble, quiet mechanic she had ruthlessly, permanently disowned her only daughter for marrying was actually the single largest private equity owner in the entire state. He was the invisible, brilliant architect of her complete destruction. The rigid, invisible social hierarchy of the room suddenly completely flipped totally upside down. Leo reached the slender microphone stand. He did not yell, scream, or gloat immaturely. He spoke with a chilling, steady calm that resonated flawlessly through the expensive speakers. He formally, politely introduced himself as the active, reigning chairman of Vanguard. He casually, coldly announced that the entire estate, including the very commercial building they were currently standing inside, was officially, legally undergoing immediate, total foreclosure due to catastrophic, massive financial default. The paralyzed crowd erupted into a chaotic, wild frenzy of shocked, loud whispers and frantic, terrified, hushed conversations. The intimidating illusion Victoria had spent long decades carefully, meticulously building was permanently eradicated in a matter of mere seconds. She collapsed heavily onto her weak knees, her silk gown pooling sadly around her on the unforgiving wooden floor. Genevieve watched the absolute ruin of her lifelong oppressor, feeling a satisfying, deep sense of final closure. However, the sweet, intoxicating taste of ultimate, glorious victory was unexpectedly, brutally interrupted. The heavy brass double doors at the rear of the grand, beautiful ballroom swung forcefully open. A large tactical team of serious federal investigators wearing dark, standard government windbreakers marched purposefully, swiftly into the noisy room. Maya quickly, urgently approached Genevieve, her beautiful face etched with severe, undeniable concern. The brilliant, loyal attorney whispered quickly that Preston had successfully vanished, and the imposing federal agents were absolutely not there to arrest the weeping matriarch. They were there to legally seize the anonymous art restoration shell company, connecting Genevieve directly to a massive, illegal international fraud ring. A highly dangerous, terrifying legal conflict fiercely emerged from the smoldering ashes of the ruined family empire, leaving the final fate of the protagonist hanging in a precarious, delicate balance. The imposing federal investigators moved with terrifying, deliberate purpose through the vast, opulent space. Their dark government windbreakers created a jarring, severe visual contrast against the shimmering evening gowns and bespoke tuxedos worn by the paralyzed Southern aristocracy. Genevieve watched these stern officials navigate the dense, glittering crowd. Maya had just whispered the frightening warning regarding the anonymous art restoration shell company. The brilliant African-American attorney squeezed the hand of her sister-in-law, signaling a desperate need for immediate, evasive action. Maya grew up fighting against systemic disadvantages and possessed an innate ability to spot impending legal catastrophes long before they materialized. However, retreating from the elevated platform was no longer a viable tactical option. The grand stage remained the undeniable focal point of the entire fractured room, and the climax of this monumental family tragedy demanded absolute finality. Leo ignored the approaching authorities, maintaining his glacial, terrifying composure. The chairman of Vanguard stepped closer to the trembling, defeated matriarch. Victoria appeared entirely broken, her elaborate facade crumbling into pathetic, invisible dust. Her manicured fingers remained rigidly, aggressively curled around the slender metal microphone stand. She was trapped in a suffocating state of cognitive dissonance, completely unable to mentally process the total collapse of her carefully curated reality. Leo gently but firmly pried the audio device from her freezing grasp. He did not raise his voice or exhibit any vulgar, loud triumph. The execution was handled with chilling, undeniable legal precision. He spoke clearly into the receiver, his deep, resonant baritone echoing across the completely silent, breathless ballroom. He clinically informed the wealthy audience that Vanguard Holdings never entered into any strategic partnership with the local estate. Instead, his private equity firm had systematically, covertly acquired every single defaulted financial obligation belonging to the corrupt family. He calmly announced the immediate, lawful initiation of total property foreclosure. The magnificent historic mansion, the lucrative commercial real estate, and the very venue hosting this lavish charity gala now legally belonged entirely to him. The sheer scale of his invisible corporate conquest left the most powerful politicians in Texas utterly dumbfounded. The shocking, brutal truth finally shattered the temporary paralysis gripping the disgraced host. Victoria violently lunged forward, desperately attempting to snatch the microphone back from her conqueror. Her sudden, erratic movement caused the sensitive audio equipment to emit a piercing, agonizing, high-pitched squeal. The sharp feedback violently assaulted the ears of everyone present, forcing several prominent billionaires to visibly flinch and quickly cover their faces. The once formidable queen of high society now looked utterly unhinged, her perfectly styled hair falling wildly across her sweating, manicured brow. Her expensive designer dress seemed suddenly ill-fitting, draped awkwardly over a rapidly crumbling, fragile skeleton. Panic and raw, desperate terror flooded her widened eyes. She frantically turned toward the front rows, seeking any shred of solidarity from her lifelong elite country club friends. These were the exact same powerful individuals who had attended her lavish summer retreats, eagerly drinking her imported vintage wine for 3 consecutive decades. She silently begged them for a minor intervention, or at least a sympathetic, comforting glance. Instead, the wealthy attendees simultaneously shifted their collective gaze away. They smoothly, physically rotated their bodies, presenting a unified, solid wall of expensive, tailored backs. In the ruthless, unforgiving logic of modern American aristocratic society, bankruptcy operated as a highly contagious terminal disease. Associating with a newly impoverished pariah represented absolute social suicide. She was instantly, permanently exiled from the only exclusive world she ever truly valued. Genevieve recognized that the definitive moment for ultimate closure had finally arrived. She slowly walked toward the exact center of the elevated platform. Her heavy structural morning gown brushed softly against the polished hardwood. She carried a thick, pristine manila folder discreetly retrieved from her dark clutch. She stopped directly in front of the weeping, trembling woman who had subjected her to endless years of vicious psychological torment. With deliberate, steady, calm movements, Genevieve handed over the heavy stack of formal proxy foreclosure documents. The stark black ink outlined the undeniable mathematical reality of their total, devastating ruin. Every single signature and legally binding clause represented a separate nail in the coffin of her oppressive childhood. Then the younger woman reached into a soft, protective velvet pouch she had carried all evening. She smoothly withdrew a magnificent, weighty object. It was the antique silver Caldwell family hand mirror. This precious historical heirloom had been severely damaged years ago during one of Preston and his mother exchanging legendary explosive arguments. Genevieve had spent countless painstaking solitary hours applying her world-class restoration skills to repair the deep structural fractures and polish the heavily tarnished ornate frame. The piece now gleamed flawlessly, beautifully reflecting the bright chandelier light with brilliant, stark clarity. She firmly placed the cold, heavy silver handle directly into the shaking, sweating palms of her completely defeated mother. Victoria was physically forced to look downward into the pristine, shining glass. She stared directly at her own ruined, terrified reflection. The perfectly polished surface accurately captured every single harsh, deep line of genuine terror and every pathetic wet smear of ruined, expensive cosmetics. Genevieve leaned slightly forward, maintaining a perfectly composed, stoic demeanor. She spoke quietly, ensuring only the broken, weeping matriarch could hear the final, devastating verbal verdict. She stated plainly that true, enduring wealth was never actually about accumulating massive, heavy diamonds or successfully securing exclusive elite club memberships. It was solely, fundamentally derived from the unwavering, solid integrity of your personal actions and the genuine, unconditional loyalty you carefully cultivated within your inner family. By systematically, aggressively trading natural maternal love for superficial, empty prestige, the older woman had ultimately entirely bankrupted her own soul long before the global financial markets ever forcefully intervened. It was a deeply satisfying, flawless, irrefutable document-based checkmate. The profound poetic justice hung heavily in the thick, tense atmosphere, but the harsh, impending reality of the approaching federal agents rapidly, violently broke the quiet, intimate standoff. The lead government investigator, a tall, muscular man with stern, unyielding facial features, finally reached the base of the plush, carpeted stairs. He possessed the hardened, cynical look of a veteran officer who had spent his entire long career dismantling complex, white-collar criminal enterprises. He bypassed Genevieve entirely, totally ignoring the newly revealed corporate titan standing quietly beside her. The determined agent marched directly up to the weeping, shattered matriarch. He reached into his dark nylon jacket and produced a stark, official legal warrant. Maya stepped cautiously toward the dangerous edge of the wide stage, her sharp, brilliant legal mind rapidly, efficiently processing the unfolding chaotic scene. The intelligent lawyer observed the specific official seals stamped heavily onto the government paperwork. The determined federal agent loudly, formally declared that Victoria was being placed under immediate, lawful arrest for directly orchestrating a massive, illegal international art fraud conspiracy. He specifically mentioned the highly controversial anonymous shell company currently holding the heavily disputed maritime painting. Genevieve felt a sudden, jarring, massive wave of sheer, profound confusion wash entirely over her tense, rigid body. She knew absolutely that Preston was the actual, desperate, cowardly architect behind the illegal hidden restoration scheme. However, the federal investigator began clearly, loudly citing specific fraudulent banking documents used to illegally, secretly transport the stolen canvas across state jurisdictional lines. Every single forged authorizing signature on those damning papers belonged legally to the weeping Caldwell matriarch. The ultimate, horrifying, earth-shattering realization finally struck the disgraced woman with the brutal, unstoppable force of a speeding locomotive. Her precious golden boy, the cherished male heir she had consistently, fiercely, ruthlessly protected at the total expense of her own biological daughter, had ruthlessly, mercilessly thrown her under the proverbial bus. Preston had secretly, illegally utilized his mother and her private executive access codes to entirely frame her for his own reckless, disastrous criminal enterprise. He successfully, quietly fled the heavily guarded building, leaving her alone to completely absorb the catastrophic, devastating federal felony charges. The ultimate, bitter family betrayal was now flawlessly, shockingly complete, instantly creating an incredibly dangerous new legal war that threatened to drag everyone down into the dark, suffocating abyss. The chaotic atmosphere inside the historic venue bordered on absolute pandemonium. Wealthy guests murmured frantically, their eyes wide with morbid fascination, as the mighty Southern dynasty crumbled completely before them. The grand mahogany doors positioned at the rear of the enormous hall suddenly burst open with immense force. A pair of imposing government marshals forcefully dragged a highly agitated individual back into the brilliantly illuminated central space. Preston had not successfully bypassed the external security blockade. The frantic heir looked exceptionally disheveled and wild. His custom-tailored jacket was torn near the shoulder seam, and his complexion mirrored the color of spoiled milk. The authorities had intercepted him sprinting toward a waiting private helicopter on the adjacent landing pad, ending his pathetic, cowardly flight before it could even truly begin. Upon witnessing the forced return of her beloved male offspring, the restrained matriarch experienced a profound psychotic break from reality. Victoria utterly ignored the cold steel handcuffs biting sharply into her fragile wrists. She shrieked across the silent, cavernous room, commanding her trembling son to instantly deploy his massive, hidden trust funds. The desperate woman demanded he hire the most aggressive white-collar defense syndicate in North America. She stubbornly believed that immense liquid capital could somehow magically evaporate legitimate federal indictments. Her voice cracked as she frantically ordered him to purchase their immediate freedom and restore their utterly shattered social standing among the Southern elite. She clung to the delusional fantasy that their inherited wealth provided a permanent, impenetrable shield against catastrophic legal consequences. Maya absorbed the hysterical screaming with absolute, stoic grace while standing near the polished stage. As a remarkably gifted African-American woman who had conquered the treacherous corporate ladders of modern America, she understood the precise anatomy of institutional power and systemic privilege. For half a decade, she had endured the matriarch's covert hostility. Victoria frequently deployed vicious, veiled insults regarding her daughter-in-law's prestigious academic credentials, subtly implying that diversity initiatives, rather than undeniable genius, paved her path to success. The older woman treated her son's spouse like an unwelcome interloper, a temporary blemish on their pure aristocratic bloodline. Maya had swallowed the daily poisons silently, meticulously building her own independent arsenal while watching the corrupt family decay from within. She recognized that true revenge required immense patience and flawless strategic execution. The time for polite endurance had permanently expired. Maya glided smoothly across the plush carpet, positioning her tall, elegant frame directly between the weeping mother and the paralyzed son. She projected an intimidating aura of absolute professional dominance. Speaking with a calm, surgical precision that easily cut through the ambient noise, she addressed her terrified husband. She publicly presented a stark, unyielding choice. He must irrevocably abandon his toxic, manipulative abuser immediately, publicly denouncing her criminal actions, or he would face an instantaneous, catastrophic divorce. She demanded he finally sever the psychological umbilical cord that had continuously fueled his pathetic existence. The surrounding billionaires held their collective breath, captivated by the raw domestic warfare unfolding mere inches away. To physically manifest her uncompromising stance, Maya reached toward the collar of her sophisticated evening gown. Her nimble fingers unclasped the heavy diamond-encrusted membership badges denoting her status at the most exclusionary country clubs in the state. These tiny metallic shields represented the pinnacle of aristocratic acceptance, highly coveted items people routinely destroyed their rivals to obtain. With deliberate, agonizing slowness, she placed the ornate pins onto a nearby glass-topped cocktail table. The sharp, solitary clatter of the gold impacting the hard surface echoed loudly throughout the paralyzed room. It was a beautiful, profound visual representation of discarding the suffocating, poisonous elite armor she no longer required to validate her worth. The intense spotlight shifted entirely to the trembling air. Preston stared blankly at the discarded jewelry, sweat pouring profusely down his pale forehead. His entire psychological foundation was constructed upon a pathetic, cowardly subservience to maternal authority. He lacked the fundamental courage required to forge an independent destiny. His jaw trembled violently, yet no coherent words emerged. He looked at his beautiful, brilliant wife, then cast a terrified glance toward his screaming, demanding mother. The weak man remained utterly paralyzed, trapped in a purgatory of his own creation, completely incapable of making a righteous decision that required genuine personal sacrifice. Maya did not require a verbal confirmation because his pathetic hesitation provided the ultimate, definitive answer. A cold, knowing smile touched the corners of her lips. She snapped open the golden clasps of her sleek leather portfolio. Reaching inside, she withdrew a thick, flawlessly bound stack of legal documents. With a swift, authoritative motion, she slid the pristine corporate contract across the smooth table, stopping right next to the discarded club pins. The bold, unmistakable geometric crest of Vanguard Holdings was deeply embossed into the thick parchment, gleaming ominously under the bright chandelier lighting. While Victoria had wasted years foolishly attempting to secretly sabotage her daughter-in-law's reputation among the shallow socialites Geneviève, and Leo had recognized a rare, unparalleled strategic mastermind. The newly revealed billionaires had spent the previous 8 months engaging in highly covert negotiations. They successfully recruited the phenomenal attorney to serve as the chief architect of their expanding empire. The printed pages explicitly designated Maya as the incoming executive vice president of global acquisitions for the Vanguard conglomerate. She was no longer just a relative by marriage subjected to endless microaggressions. She was now the second most powerful corporate entity in the room, answering only to the quiet man standing victoriously on the stage. Having delivered the crushing blow, the brilliant executive turned her back on the smoldering wreckage of the Caldwell dynasty. She walked confidently toward the main exit, the dense crowd parting rapidly to grant her unimpeded passage. Her measured strides projected absolute freedom and undeniable triumph. She left her cowardly husband and his tyrannical mother completely isolated, permanently stripped of their wealth, their social standing, and their fractured family. However, the masterfully executed retaliation harbored one final, breathtaking twist that nobody in the room anticipated. As the newly appointed vice president reached the heavy brass doors, the lead federal investigator stepped forward, holding a separate dossier he had extracted from his own dark jacket. He approached the paralyzed, sweating air with a grim, unyielding expression. The seasoned agent loudly informed Preston that his supposed secret immunity deal regarding the art forgery scandal was officially revoked. The investigator revealed that an anonymous whistleblower had recently provided undeniable digital evidence proving Preston alone had forged his mother's signature on the illegal transport manifests. The truly shocking revelation was the identity of the informant. The investigator held up a sworn affidavit signed by Maya herself, dated 3 weeks prior. She had not merely secured a lucrative new job to escape her miserable marriage. She had meticulously gathered every piece of damning digital communication from her husband's private encrypted servers and handed it directly to the Justice Department in exchange for total legal immunity for herself. Preston collapsed heavily to his knees, finally understanding that his brilliant wife had played the ultimate long game. She deliberately allowed him to believe he had successfully framed Victoria, ensuring he felt a false sense of absolute security before annihilating his entire reality. He was now left to face decades in federal prison alongside the very mother he had cowardly attempted to betray. This dual arrest scenario shattered the final illusion of their legacy, introducing a massive, insurmountable judicial nightmare that guaranteed their permanent erasure from polite society. The deafening wail of approaching police sirens pierced the humid night air, violently shattering the suffocating artificial atmosphere inside the cavernous ballroom. The once mighty Caldwell dynasty officially, rapidly collapsed into a chaotic public spectacle of cold steel handcuffs and severe federal mandates. Genevieve did not stay to watch the government agents physically escort her weeping, disgraced mother and her deeply terrified brother out through the restricted service entrance. The raw, visceral satisfaction of achieving total, absolute victory had already been firmly, permanently secured. She turned her back on the glittering, paralyzed crowd of silent, horrified billionaires. She felt the heavy, dark structural silk of her beautiful morning gown brush softly against her ankles as she walked calmly, confidently toward the grand, sweeping foyer. Leo matched her steady, measured pace perfectly. His quiet, formidable presence felt exactly like a solid, immovable mountain standing protectively beside her. The highly toxic, exclusionary world of the Texas elite, the exact same oppressive, aristocratic environment that had relentlessly demanded her absolute silent submission for 30 long, agonizing years, finally completely faded into pathetic irrelevance. As they crossed the pristine, imported marble threshold, Genevieve reflected deeply on her own incredibly arduous, solitary journey toward genuine independence. She had spent the last agonizing decade breathing harsh chemical solvents inside a cramped, unventilated suburban studio. She meticulously, carefully pieced together fragile, forgotten historical masterpieces, while her arrogant, wealthy family continuously, viciously ridiculed her chosen professional craft as a pathetic, dirty, meaningless hobby. She successfully forged her own distinct, powerful identity through sheer, relentless personal grit, entirely independent of inherited massive capital. Leo understood this profound, silent struggle intimately. He grew up in a very modest, working-class neighborhood, carefully watching his dedicated, tired grandfather rebuild broken, heavy machinery with calloused, thick, grease-stained hands. He built his unfathomable, massive global empire, strictly, fiercely honoring that exact same rigorous, honest work ethic. They shared a beautiful fundamental understanding that genuine, enduring power always required immense personal sacrifice and uncompromising, strict ethical standards. Stepping out onto the circular, wide concrete driveway, the oppressive, heavy heat of the southern coastal climate immediately enveloped them. The valet staff appeared completely, utterly shell-shocked by the unfolding, massive indoor drama and the sudden arrival of multiple federal vehicles. A lone, nervous attendant hesitantly brought forward their requested personal transportation. It was absolutely not a flashy, bright, imported European sports car designed strictly for shallow, empty social posturing. It was a meticulously, flawlessly restored, classic, vintage machine. The magnificent, aggressive, sleek silhouette of the beautiful vintage automotive masterpiece sat idling smoothly, quietly, under the warm, yellow security lights. Genevieve slowly, gently traced her fingers along the pristine, dark, glossy paint, deeply appreciating the countless hours of invisible, dedicated labor required to properly resurrect such a complex, wonderful machine. Leo opened the heavy, solid passenger door with quiet, respectful reverence. He slipped seamlessly behind the worn, leather-wrapped steering wheel, feeling the raw, powerful analog vibration of the massive engine pulse directly through his dark, tailored suit. The wide, thick tires gripped the smooth, dark asphalt firmly as they accelerated smoothly, steadily away from the towering, opulent, corrupted estate. The imposing heavy wrought iron gates of the highly exclusive property opened one final, definitive time, granting them permanent, undisputed, glorious freedom. Genevieve adjusted the small, rectangular interior rearview mirror. She stared intently, intensely at the rapidly shrinking reflection of the grand, historic country club. The vibrant, chaotic, flashing blue and red emergency lights violently illuminated the grand, classic facade, casting long, sinister, dark shadows across the perfectly manicured green lawns. A profound, sudden internal conflict rapidly surfaced, demanding her immediate, focused psychological attention. For her entire privileged adult life, she had harbored a massive, heavy, dark sphere of genuine resentment toward the specific, cruel woman who bore her. She realized suddenly in that quiet, safe, moving sanctuary that continuously carrying such intense, deep hatred required a massive, completely unsustainable expenditure of precious, vital, emotional energy. The ultimate, absolute, breathtaking triumph was not simply orchestrating her vicious mother experiencing total, devastating public humiliation. The true, beautiful victory was finally, permanently, safely evicting Victoria from her own mind. Genevieve exhaled a long, shaky, deep breath, feeling decades of accumulated severe childhood trauma physically, literally evaporate from her tense, rigid shoulders. The painful, phantom maternal approval she had desperately chased during her vulnerable youth no longer held any power over her destiny. She looked forward through the wide, clear windshield, focusing entirely, completely, on the dark, endless, open highway, stretching beautifully, invitingly toward a brand new, brilliant horizon. She was finally, absolutely, completely free. 6 highly productive, busy months rapidly, successfully passed, transforming the smoldering, dark ashes of the tragic past into a magnificent, incredibly vibrant future. The loving couple relocated permanently to the lush, beautiful, hilly landscape of Central Texas, leaving the toxic coastal city entirely behind. Utilizing the virtually limitless, immense financial resources provided by the Vanguard corporate conglomerate, Genevieve fully, successfully manifested her ultimate, lifelong, beautiful ambition. She legally established a massive, completely independent, world-class modern art museum located directly in the bustling, vibrant cultural epicenter of the capital city. The breathtaking, stunning, modern architectural structure featured massive, sweeping, curved glass walls and abundant, warm, natural sunlight. Her brilliant, beautiful African-American sister-in-law proved absolutely, fundamentally instrumental in executing the aggressive, highly complex commercial real estate acquisitions required to secure the prime property. Maya thrived spectacularly brightly in her newly appointed, prominent executive role. She ruthlessly, efficiently dismantled corrupt local zoning boards and easily, brilliantly outmaneuvered greedy, aggressive corporate developers, utilizing her lethal, unparalleled, sharp legal expertise. Maya had completely, joyfully shed the suffocating daily racist microaggressions of her former miserable life, emerging as an undisputed, terrifying titan within the elite global corporate sector. The expansive, beautiful Austin compound did not merely passively display priceless historical artifacts to wealthy, ignorant consumers. The sprawling green campus featured a premier, highly advanced academic restoration academy, specifically, deliberately designed to heavily train the next eager generation of talented, highly diverse young artisans. Genevieve personally meticulously designed the rigorous, incredibly comprehensive educational curriculum. She actively, aggressively recruited passionate, deeply dedicated young students from heavily marginalized, severely underfunded public school districts, offering them complete, generous, full academic scholarships. She patiently taught them the delicate, highly intricate, exact science of preserving fragile human history. She eagerly provided the exact same warm, nurturing, supportive mentorship she was so brutally, coldly denied during her own extremely isolated, lonely youth. The academic institution stood proudly as a towering, undeniable, beautiful monument to true ethical power and genuine, inclusive, supportive community building. The epic narrative required one final, breathtaking, surprising resolution to permanently, strictly close the dark, tragic, miserable chapter of the ruined Caldwell lineage. The massive, extensive real estate portfolio previously owned by the severely disgraced, incarcerated matriarch underwent a total, comprehensive, aggressive liquidation process. Most opportunistic, wealthy spectators naturally, cynically assumed Vanguard Holdings would simply quietly sell the massive historic Houston mansion to another ruthless, arrogant, predatory billionaire. However, Leo and Genevieve executed a far more surprising, truly astonishing maneuver that left the entire remaining Southern aristocracy completely gasping in pure, utter disbelief. They absolutely did not sell the sprawling, highly toxic property. They completely, entirely, physically demolished it. A massive fleet of heavy, yellow industrial bulldozers systematically, ruthlessly reduced the grand, opulent, pristine estate to a flat, bare, empty field of crushed white marble and violently shattered timber. Genevieve actively, personally oversaw the entire, rigorous, careful ecological remediation process, ensuring every single microscopic trace of the corrupt physical foundation was entirely, permanently removed from the soft earth. She subsequently legally, generously donated the massive, pristine, highly valuable acreage directly to the local municipal government under one highly specific, completely unalterable, strict condition. The incredibly valuable, rare land was permanently, beautifully transformed into a sprawling, lush, vibrant public park, explicitly, exclusively dedicated to serving underprivileged minority urban youth. She named the beautiful, vibrant, open green space directly, respectfully, after Maya and her incredibly hardworking, dedicated parents. The wealthy, exclusionary, terrified elite were absolutely deeply horrified to helplessly witness their highly coveted, quiet, private sanctuary transformed into a loud, joyful, messy playground for the exact same diverse working-class citizens they had consistently, viciously, openly despised. Victoria languished miserably in a bleak, cold federal penitentiary, completely, permanently stripped of her physical freedom, her immense stolen wealth, and her highly beloved, arrogant family name. Genevieve successfully, beautifully created a sweeping, magnificent, lasting legacy built entirely, solidly, upon pure, mutual respect, fierce, brave authenticity, and unwavering, strict ethical integrity. The vintage, powerful engine roared happily, loudly, as she expertly navigated the winding, scenic, beautiful roads of her brand new city, holding her husband's warm, strong hand, knowing she had finally, beautifully, unequivocally, completely won. When the heavy dust finally settles over the completely shattered remains of the Caldwell Empire, we are left staring silently at a profound and terrifying question. It is not merely a question about corporate leverage, hostile takeovers, or the cutthroat dynamics of private equity. It is a fundamental, piercing inquiry into the very soul of the modern American family. For generations, we have been culturally conditioned to spend our entire adult lives building impenetrable fortresses of security for our children. We desperately accumulate wealth, prestige, and social influence, hoping to permanently shield our offspring from a harsh, unpredictable world. Yet the smoldering ruins of Victoria's carefully curated dynasty reveal a chilling, undeniable truth about modern parenting values. We frequently, tragically, confuse the simple provision of material safety with the complex, difficult cultivation of moral character. This narrative is not simply a thrilling tale of corporate revenge. It is a dark, brilliant mirror reflecting our deepest, quietest anxieties about genuine family responsibility and the long-term guidance we provide to the next generation walking into an uncertain future. Consider the tragic, rapid downward trajectory of the golden heir. From the exact moment he took his very first breath, he was completely insulated from the natural, logical consequences of his own disastrous actions. He was raised strictly within a traditional family structure that prioritized public perception and flawless image management entirely over private accountability. This represents a common fatal flaw in modern American parenting, where the intense biological desire to protect a child slowly morphs into a toxic, suffocating shielding. This artificial environment completely prevents the natural development of vital emotional resilience. Fairness was never introduced into his psychological vocabulary because his commanding mother aggressively engineered a distorted reality where he always emerged victorious, regardless of his actual effort or fundamental merit. By continuously financially rescuing him from his own ethical failures, she effectively permanently crippled his psychological immune system. When the ultimate brutal test of his character finally arrived on that grand stage, he did not possess the necessary ethical fortitude to stand his ground. He instinctively chose cowardly betrayal over honest accountability, proving, undeniably, that a parent who artificially removes every single obstacle simply guarantees their child will eventually be utterly crushed by the real, unforgiving world. Conversely, we must closely examine the breathtaking, undeniable triumph of the daughter who was cruelly cast into the dark shadows. She was permanently denied the basic warmth of maternal affection and ruthlessly stripped of her inherent structural advantages. Yet this severe emotional starvation inadvertently forged an unbreakable, solid core of absolute integrity. She learned quite early in her lonely youth that superficial validation is utterly worthless when completely divorced from genuine truth. Her arduous, solitary journey highlights the absolute paramount necessity of emotional awareness in raising strong, capable human beings. When we brave the storm and force our children to confront uncomfortable, difficult truths, when we demand strict honesty, even when the immediate reality is incredibly painful, we are actually handing them the heaviest, most valuable armor they will ever possibly wear. She absolutely did not defeat her lifelong oppressors by matching their extreme cruelty or stooping to their toxic level. She masterfully dismantled their fraudulent paper empire by standing firmly, quietly, in her own authentic ethical power. This represents the ultimate pinnacle of proper, long-term familial guidance, demonstrating beautifully that true, enduring wealth is measured entirely by the strength and direction of your internal moral compass. The profound, vital inclusion of a brilliant, fiercely independent daughter-in-law further shatters our comfortable, outdated illusions regarding traditional family loyalties. She entered a deeply entrenched, arrogant, aristocratic structure and encountered relentless covert hostility, poorly masked as polite Southern tradition. Her ultimate devastating defection and subsequent powerful alliance with the exiled daughter illuminates a critical, necessary evolution in exactly how we define family responsibility in contemporary society. Family is no longer merely a strict biological mandate requiring total blind allegiance to toxic, abusive authority figures. It is a conscious, deliberate, daily choice built solidly upon a firm foundation of mutual respect, fairness, and unyielding emotional safety. When a parent or matriarch weaponizes their absolute authority to continuously manipulate and control, they immediately, permanently forfeit the sacred right to demand filial piety. The greatest fundamental responsibility we hold is not to blindly, unconditionally uphold a crumbling family name, but to actively, fiercely protect the emotional well-being of the vulnerable individuals trapped within it. Maya recognized her own immense worth and bravely shattered the vicious cycle of abuse, proving that walking away from a corrupt traditional structure is often the most profound act of self-preservation and personal integrity. This entire sweeping, intense saga forces us to violently, rapidly re-examine the very fundamental concept of legacy. We are deeply culturally conditioned to firmly believe that our ultimate life purpose is to leave something massive and tangible behind for our direct descendants. We draft elaborate, ironclad trusts, secure massive, sprawling real estate portfolios, and meticulously, carefully plan complex inheritances, believing these heavy financial instruments will somehow guarantee our immortality. But the swift, total Caldwell collapse proves definitively that immense financial capital is inherently highly fragile and easily, rapidly corrupted when it is not strictly supported by immense moral capital. The only enduring actual legacy any parent can ever guarantee is the internal psychological framework they carefully, patiently install within their growing child. Absolute honesty, deep fairness, and profound emotional intelligence are the sole true currencies that successfully survive generational transitions. Everything else is just temporary rented furniture, waiting patiently to be ruthlessly repossessed by the universe. If you found yourself deeply captivated by this intense, thoughtful exploration of family betrayal and the raw, devastating consequences of fractured loyalties, I highly encourage you to consistently follow Aura Vengeance. Join our rapidly growing engaged community as we continue to fiercely dissect the complex, dark, and deeply human stories that resonate perfectly with the hidden, quiet struggles we all navigate daily. As you quietly reflect upon the cold ashes of this ruined, prominent dynasty, you must eventually turn that piercing, critical gaze directly inward. We easily point our judgmental, righteous fingers at the tyrannical, wealthy mother and the cowardly, trembling son, quickly condemning their obvious, massive, fatal flaws. Yet their specific tragedy is terrifyingly universally ordinary, simply loudly amplified by immense liquid wealth. We must bravely ask ourselves what subtle, everyday, convenient lies we consistently tell our own children in the desperate, blind name of protecting their fragile innocence. We must rigorously question if our own strict household rules are truly designed to build their long-term character or merely constructed to briefly soothe our own crippling parental anxieties. We foolishly believe our greatest sacred duty is to patiently fill our children with our own hard-won wisdom, ensuring they perfectly neatly mirror our finest manufactured qualities. But here is the brutal, entirely unexpected truth that this dark narrative ultimately, flawlessly delivers. The most profound, enduring, precious gift a deeply flawed parent can ever possibly provide is absolutely not their long-term guidance or their suffocating conditional love. The greatest, ultimate gift is the crystalline, horrifying, flawless blueprint of exactly who not to become. Sometimes the only possible way a child can ever truly learn how to fly is by watching their creator voluntarily step off a steep cliff and absolutely refuse to save them.